Going. We're just streaming live here right now. I'm sure those of you that are watching the recording at the moment can kind of like just jump in and check out what's going on. But we'll wait for people as they kind of hop in here in the room, and we'll see if we can set this up in terms of just establishing the page. Don't really have a full exact plan just yet. Just a couple characters in mind as to what I'll be playing with today. We're doing some live drawing, and this is kind of building off, and I'll explain more in context as to what this stuff we're doing today is. Give me one moment as I also just grab. I'm gonna watch a YouTube stream off my iPad so I can kind of read some questions from here. So welcome everybody who is planning to join. What we're doing today is we are going to be doing some basically some character work, character illustration work. Recently in the last week or so, a couple days, I've been kind of working on some pieces here for the upcoming Comic-Con show for New York. And I've been wanting to like kind of fill up the portfolio of original pieces. And so those of you that have been following me on social media will know what these pieces are, like this one here, the Batman Absolute. So these ones I just did in the last couple of days just to test out a couple of different sort of materials. This is an illustration board I'm working on. This is a Crescent brand. This is just regular watercolor paper. And also trying out things like, watercolor to color pencil. This is just marker only with a little bit of color pencil on top. And so just trying to get a feel of just getting some images that can have a little bit more refinement and polish. Because a lot of the stuff I'll sell in portfolios at like Comic Cons and stuff, originals are typically like line drawings, black and white, sketch work, that sort of stuff. Drawings of illustrations too. But I wanted to have a little bit of a collection of character-centric pieces that are of known characters as well too. I'm also going to generate some originals of my own as well too, as a collection of things. So what we have here right now is I have watercolor paper also. This is cold press. The one I was using earlier, the Absolute Batman one. This one's a different brand. It's got a bit more of a cream color to it. This one is from kind of an off-brand, really. Its quality is somewhat so-so. This one is slightly better, I would say. I think this is Strathmore. Actually might be Canson, if anything else. But either way, this is all cut to sizing. So they were on bigger sheets. This was, I think, on 11 by 17, maybe bigger than that, 13 by 19. This is a really big sheet that I cut into sections. And so these are all 11 by 14 dimensions. On Instagram, I posted up a question of what kind of character I'd want to go into next. I got a lot of great sort of suggestions of character types that people would like to see. I narrowed it down to a couple, mainly based on how many sort of requests of them I got on Instagram itself. So I kind of narrowed down to three, which was one, either going to be Spawn. Second, it's going to be either potentially Vampire Hunter D. And the third was surprisingly Storm from X-Men. So I've selected to go with Spawn for the moment. I haven't drawn that character since I was probably my teenage years, when Spawn first came out back in the 90s. And I bought that Spawn #1 magazine or a comic right off the newsstand in my local little convenience store where I rode my bike and found that comic. So it was always something that, kind of stood out as a memory in my own sort of experience at the time when I was a kid collecting comic books. There were a couple of series of comics in the 90s that I bought off the rack as a kid. X-Men 1, from Jim Lee was one of them. The Spawn comic was the other, and a few of the Image comics as well too. Anyways, in terms of what we're going to be using to draw with, we are using the Zebra brand pen. Sorry, you can't see it. Zebra is a known brand, popular. I mainly used their ballpoints in the past. This particular pen, the felt tip pen, which I don't actually know the name of, it's all in Japanese. I recently found again at the local art store and picked up like 2 or 3 packs. And typically these kind of brush pens I'll buy, a couple at a time. This one I used up a little bit. In combination, I also have the Tombow Furinosuke, which I'm sure people are very familiar with. I also have the Micron Pigma PN as well too. So these three I'll have kind of in combination. This one will give me a nice thin line. This will be a combination of thin to medium. This would be more for like some backup basically to this pen, because these are basically very similar. They're all basically waterproof. So if I want to apply, watercolors or marker, it won't run and bleed. So These ones, as T Fleas is mentioning, is easier to find. The zebras are not super common. I haven't seen them in many art stores. Only recently I see them at the one I go to here in Pasadena called Blue Rooster. So they've been carrying a few packs of these ones. The Micron PN, usually you would only find in like those big packs. I never seen these individually, unless the store will have them on a rack on like little stands. But typically these ones I would always get in a pack set. So the PN nib is a plastic nib. So it holds the shape pretty well. It's nice for things like really sort of fine control, but it's also really good waterproof ink. Okay, so having said that, we're just gonna go straight in. So I'm gonna draw Spawn. What I'm gonna do here is the kind of images I want to make in these character pieces is something that's a bit more presentable. I'm not trying to push camera like crazy. Posing can be played with a little bit. I want it to be, again, like I said, just more of a presentation piece. So it'll be more of a front view of Spawn. I had the visual sort of concept of him coming out of like the ground, kind of bursting out of it essentially. And so I wanted to push him into like this A-frame silhouette or like a V shape essentially, upside down V. I'm sorry, no, regular V shape. Sorry. Okay, cool. Just checking the chat. So we're just going to use a zebra pen for now. Let me test the line quality on this thing at the moment. Let me do it like this. I'm going to grab this back of this sheet here, document. So it'll give me a relatively thin enough line here. Going horizontally, it's a little bit thicker. Vertically, much thinner. If I turn it this way, I'll go thin. So I'm comfortable with the line weight with this one. So the first things I usually want to do here, if I'm going straight pen, which typically I will, the absolute Batman piece I just showed was straight pen with this one. The Phantom Blade piece was pencil first, to do sort of a controlled image. And the process and how I work on things can vary from piece to piece. Full client pieces, certain illustrations I'm working on, I'll do even thumbnails, underlays. I don't really do a lot of pencil underlay that often, but I'll do it in terms of, making sure that the client gets what they want. But it's also a fun process, which is always great. For this one, we're just gonna go straight ink. And what I want to do here is just establish general sort of placement compositionally where I want this. Again, I want kind of like a frame composition. And I'm gonna have some of his like cape coming up this direction. It's kind of the idea and the concept. The only idea I have is that he's bursting out of the ground. In terms of what the pose, the details, specifically, that sort of stuff, even some of the details of his costuming, I'll kind of play with. Obviously, I'll try to retain as close as I can. I don't have a reference in front of me right now. The phone is what's recording the YouTube. My iPad's using it to display the stream, so I don't have any other sort of hardware to show me the reference of the character. So I'll do the best I can in terms of memory. I have a good idea as to what it is. The first thing I'm going to do here is just establish, just making sure symmetry-wise, about here. I'm just eyeballing it. This would be about the top of the head, this mark right here. You may not be able to see it on the video, but for myself, it's about there. I'm going to put the bottom of his head about here, and all the way down to about here is where I want kind of his body to come out. The rest of this sort of rubbling is going to be from here to here. So, people will ask me a lot of times, like, do I construct, when I do these sort of like straight pen sketches. And a lot of times, it may seem very minimal, like I would just go straight in there and draw it. But the thing is, this sort of intentional mark making, I'm showing it to you specifically. A lot of times I may not necessarily frame. So within this space right here is what I want to work within too. And that's something important to register, which is where is the image going to go? Because if I don't establish some things, you may come off the page. So when you guys begin to sketch and draw things, especially when you're training with pen only, doing this sort of stuff of mark making and landmarks to kind of give yourself a perimeter is perfectly fine. And you can definitely do a pencil underlay if you want to, markers if you want. The process and how you sketch doesn't matter. It's really more about just what you find to be enjoyable. So I'm going to get to some questions in a bit, but let's not kind of go straight into it. We're going to go up to the head up here. And I'm going to have him looking up a little bit. So put the bottom of the chin on this side. I do want to push the stylistic nature of this to a degree. So even it's like his proportions, shape design, that sort of stuff, I kind of want to just play with. Stylistically, what I really like are things like the Capcom sort of look. I've always been a huge fan of that styling. Guys like Akiman and Bengus. I've always been much more siding towards stylized characters anyways when I was younger. And that's sort of like rubbed off on me still to this day. I don't mind like more realistic proportions, but in terms of like shape design, certain details, I really like kind of playing with it stylistically. And when we say stylized, it's kind of more based on the manipulation of shape and proportion. Line work for sure too, but a lot of it is really coming down to those two components, shape and proportion. So this is his head looking up. This is his neck to his trapezius over here. Again, I'm going to stretch his proportions out this direction. This is a part of his like that collar where the cape comes in. No, typically, it kind of goes up like above his head. What I want to do is like push it outwards like this. Again, I want to manipulate this the way I want to. Even though this is a known character, I'm not beholden to make it look exactly like what it is in some reference or the design originally from Todd McFarlane. This is my own image, so I can creatively push it or alter it the way I want to. We'll come back to the face in terms of the design later on. This will kind of give me a sense of like where the brow is over here. This will be the sort of that color portion. I'm gonna have them like push out of the ground. Apologies, the way I have it set up right now in the garage, I'm streaming off of my phone, so I don't have a webcam or something like that to be able to have you guys see me directly. So apologies. Sometimes I'm sure some people like to be able to see what I look like as I'm talking. You get a little bit more interactive immersion, I guess, that way. But these sort of last couple of streams lately have been mostly off my phone in the garage. So, but I hope it's been okay so far. This is where his delta will come in. I'm going to have his tricep go this direction. He's going to be climbing up, so I'm going to have his knee up in here, pushing off of one foot. And a lot of things I'm going to have also like kind of go into shadow shape, just a loss of certain amounts of detail. I am going to do some coloring on this as like the other pieces, so I am going to be mindful of how much detail I place in anyways. And if you're asking questions right now, we're not reading them just yet, so I'll get to them in just a moment. So if you're asking if this chat's scrolling through, if I miss it, it's not because I'm not reading it. It's basically because I'm not going to it just yet. So be a little bit patient, and we'll get into some questions soon. Well, I've come to realize, I think it's probably a bit better to establish a little bit of the work as people are joining in, so they have a little bit more to kind of watch, especially in the recording version. Instead of just having me sit here answering a bunch of questions and talking. People seem to, at least, of course, like to see some visual action going on. So we're going to establish the image first. And it doesn't mean I'm not going to talk. I obviously like to discuss and talk about things all the time. So I'm sure people are used to that. He's going to have some crazy big boots off of this. And he had these massive giant gauntlets. And like I said, proportionally, I'm going to play with this and alter it like crazy. And I'm trying to move as loosely and freely as I can. I don't want to hang up on too much like tightness and control, and I just want to just move. I mean, do I exactly know all the where details are going to go? No, I'll make some stuff up. I'll add it later on. I'm not worried about if it's matching up exactly just yet. And we have the ability, I have the capacity to be able to alter, manipulate more and more if I need to. So there's no concern to be too careful right now, even if it is just straight ink. So for those of you that are also sketching with me right now, if you're sketching with pen or whatever material tool, just take a breath, relax, draw loosely. Don't be too tight. And approach this with a sense of looseness and relaxation if you can. If you can. Understandably, it can be nerve-wracking for many other people. Notice I'm kind of jumping around. I like to establish components and pieces and elements and go back and forth. And I don't like getting stuck in one spot and trying to finish it. The concept of trying to finishing something is not really there for me. I just want to continue to just build it overall as I go through and maintain a bigger sense of the picture. I'm gonna have the color come up here. Wrapping below, underneath. I have not read a Spawn comic since probably the 90s. Uh, I think the last one I actually like sat and really looked at was it was a crossover of Spawn and this female character that she's like this kind of warrior type. I can't remember what the hell her name was. It started with an A. Um, he obviously had like these chains on the front with like these little skulls over here. And for the chains, we're just going to do silhouettes, shapes. And they're not even like perfect linkages and stuff like that. They can be abstracted or crinkly looking, and that's the beauty of what we're trying to do is that keep it loose. But if you're trying to draw every single little link and stuff like that, it's going to take you forever. Let me actually adjust the camera a little bit because I feel like it's been rotated slightly. Give me 1 second. Yeah. Angela. That was a name. Thank you, Benjamin. That was the last one of a Spawn comic I probably read. And I remember he had these giant skull on the buckle. Because at the time when I was younger, also, when Spawn first came out, I did buy the Spawn toy in the 90s, the very first one from McFarlane. That loose figure, I think I still have somewhere in a box. Gosh, that was a long time ago. And the rest of his cape, let me behind him. Again, A-frame going down this direction. I'm gonna have it wrap around back up this direction. I want the cape almost like fingers or claws, like reaching up and around. I want to create overlaps. Again, the idea of abstracting these elements and pieces. This will be all part of his cape. I know it's probably a little bit distant, so it's probably hard to see some of the details, but I can bring the camera up a little bit closer, so if you give me a moment. Let's do it like this, actually. Just a little bit closer. This is on I'm in the garage right now, working out the counter. So I have an arm situated on this, so I can move a little bit of it. What I want is now his hand out here. Like I said, I want to have like crumbling rock and rubble below this section. And as I color this, I want there to be like color coming underneath, obviously like a green or a red or something like that, illuminating his underside. And we'll create just a silhouette of his body there. And this would be some of the rubble underneath. have his hand on this side, faced forward a little bit more. His thumb, the index finger, middle finger here, kind of gripping onto this like rock structure. My ball that's like forced open. So drawing wise, establishing the general idea uh, won't really take us too much time. We're going to spend a bit more time on being able to kind of implement some of the minor details, some of the design of the shadow shapes, fill a lot of that in with a brush and ink. And we still need to solve out a lot of these elements and also some of the lower portion. As the title has mentioned, this is our at this point I've been following the count of our episodes. uh I think at a certain point I had established a certain number because I transferred, this is years ago now, from Twitch to YouTube. So I was doing, most of my streams on Twitch at the time. And I think I had carried over a certain amount of episodes, or I'd done a certain amount of episodes on there. And I say episodes based on sessions like this live. And then when I decided to move over to YouTube more primarily, I just kind of carried over the number from that count over to the YouTube channel, which I probably should have just started over, honestly. Because then going all the way back to my live streams, you would have then an official sort of starting from one up to now. But I think it starts at like 20 or 30 something. And then we're now at 77. But basically, I'm hitting the 90K subscriber, and we're on our path, hopefully, to be able to hit the 100,000. So I'm hoping to be able to hit that next sort of tier within, hopefully, by the end of the year. That would be great. Um, it was never really a sort of thing on my mind of like, oh, I have to aim for that and push for it kind of thing. It's like, that's nice that we're getting close to that sort of number. Um, if we achieve it, fantastic, you know. So it's much more just to be able to like, kind of put that on the radar now. But who knows how long it'll take? Maybe it's until next year. It's amazing how certain channels grow quite quickly. They explode on some of them. This has been a very sort of steady, slow growing sort of channel, but consistent in terms of subscribers and people on here jumping on the live stream, and thankfully actually not too gigantic. And I've always mentioned this in the past where I've always kind of liked the idea of keeping this a bit smaller. So we have more of a controllable sort of moderating approach to the groups and the crowds of people in here that want to talk and ask questions and stuff like that. Because I could imagine it'd be kind of hard to maintain and control if I didn't have a individual to help me navigate this as a separate person to read some of the chat. But for the moment, let me go back and now read some of the questions. As we establish most of the main image, I'm going to go back up to the head, go back down details, hit the bottom portion of this, and then kind of wrap things up in detail information, and we'll start hitting some of the shadows. So let me read some questions first. So Nguyen has a question about how do you draw some soft textures like fur or feather? When you draw them, they don't feel natural, and I screw up all the time. Well, textural surfacing can be quite difficult to manage, and one of the more harder elements of visual communication within our class. And people tend to spend a lot of our time being able or trying to capture a certain amount of visual acuity that communicates the idea or the concept of what they're trying to say. And we're talking about visual surfacing information based on tactile things, three-dimensional surfaces like fur, or rough surfaces or sharp surfaces, or things like feathers and whatnot. Things that cover surfaces of objects that are natural to man-made. And that's kind of the idea as to, the question as to what Nguyen's talking about. But But obviously, we don't have the time to sit here and go into demos and show you guys that kind of stuff. This is not really a class. So, that would be picked up in the classroom in itself or through books and stuff like this. But however, if I was to give like one bit of advice on that part, is to be able to first design the shape design. You got to be able to understand that every sort of surfacing information of texture and information can be first designed by shape. So that means the shape of the feather, the shape of the patch of fur, the shape of something that is, again, tactile on that surface nature. You got to be able to understand what that shape design is, and you got to be able to spend the time on the page to come to that potential conclusion by effort and trial and error. You can look at other people's work, and it might give you a better sense of a direction, of course. And that's where you can look at other individuals as master artists or fellow students and people you're working with to give yourself a general sort of clue of idea of how to approach it. But tactile surfaces or texture surfaces are very much a thing to incorporate into your library of work of methods because surfaces want to feel different. So the skin that he's wearing with a suit will be relatively slick, but the surfacing of the gauntlets and stuff like that can be more rough and sort of rocky or metallic looking. It could be reflective, but this wouldn't be reflective at all. It'd be much more rockier, if anything else. So I'll probably put a lot of textural bumps and that sort of thing on there. But that's the idea, right? I know he had some sort of graphical shape here in the chest area, but I'm not going to draw that in. I'm going to leave that and save it to the coloring part. So there are a lot of information to surface detail here that I can reserve till later when we go into the extra materials. So the thing is, the hard part when it comes to stuff like illustrative pieces or where you're going to take things a bit further into a polish of information is being able to understand how to design and reserve that information for various stages and steps. Where if you just draw everything out, it may not be the most appropriate. It may not also be the best design. So being considerate to information and how you want to actually detail it or control it is learned over by time and of course by process of understanding of other people and being able to pick up on that and apply it your own sort of way. So here's a bunch of spikes on the gauntlet and it'll be segmented rows of armor pieces and maybe we'll have interesting sort of like textural details within the surfacing, but also functional details of binding or straps or whatever the case is. Let's go to some more questions. And again, if I miss questions here, please do understand I am sometimes selecting questions to answer. And so if you want to be able to ask again, I can go into it. Um, and I'm reading some of the questions of tech stuff. Is everybody hearing the audio and the video okay now? I'm sure there must have been a little bit of hiccups here and there, but please do give me a bit more feedback at the moment currently, as we've been streaming for a couple of minutes now, as to the quality of how it's going. Hopefully it's all right. I think it's a little bit stuttery because in the garage my Wi-Fi connection is there, but I think it's been a little bit hiccupy. Hopefully it's smooth enough. I don't mind doing these sort of live streams in the garage. I like it because it gives me the space and the lighting. But at some point, I'm probably going to just do some of these more back in my studio, in my office room, because my Wi-Fi connection there is much stronger. Cool. Thank you for the feedback for the stream. Okay, I'm just going to answer a couple more questions here. One of the questions is, are there big differences between brush pens of different brands, like with the pressure you can apply and the sensitivity? Do you guys have tried different brands? I mean, they're the kind of brands of things like Pentel. There's Kuretake. Um, and for brush pens, that's kind of about it. And I'm talking about like, you know, synthetic sable brush types. This can be considered a brush pen also, but more a felt tip brush pen. It's thinner, more compact, and you can get thicker brush pens as well too that are felt sort of shaped. I'm not a big fan of those types. Felt tip brush pens, I'm not a big fan of because they fray quite easily. So I tend to use actual brushes that are, synthetic plastic um, fibers. They give you a lot more flexibility, more line variation. It reacts like an actual brush because it is a brush. So those are the ones that I tend to use. And the Kuretake brand, is, oh, the Pentel brand really is the primary one. Kuretake I will use for things like the water brush pens. They make water brush pens. I can't actually remember if they make ink brush pens. Kuretake. I've always just ended up using the Pentel. But do they feel different? Not that much. Even things like these sort of felt tip brush pens, this is the Zebra Brun, this is the Tombow, they don't feel that different. There can be minute differences, especially when it comes to ink. It can vary for sure. Um, but the amount of, variation to them can be slight. And for some people, it can make a difference for sure. For myself, when it comes to these sort of, name brands or off brands or things off a shelf, not really that much. I think the only area in which I'll see a lot more sort of difference is with the kind of actual brushes you'll buy, or things like fountain pens. That usually will make a difference in terms of what brand, how much you spend, that sort of stuff. Crab Doc is asking, is it bad to prefer the process of drawing more than the final result? So I'm going to repeat that again. Is it bad to prefer the process of drawing more than the final result? Beyond knowing I'm progressing my skill, I simply am not in it for the results. You're restless about improvement, but content studying. Well, to simply answer your question, no, it's not wrong to love the process more than the final resulting action of your piece. However, it's not about staying comfortable or sort of, let's say, isolating yourself, pigeonholing yourself into a safety zone or comfortable zone in what you like. I think it is important that you not only fall in love with your process or enjoy the process, but also to be able to complete the task of an image making that might be equivalent to what you're aiming for, whatever that may be. It could be an illustration piece for like a comic cover. It could be, some sort of design. It could be a marketable illustration. It could be a book, sort of interior thing, a children's book or something like that. It can vary in application, but you do need to be able to find what does it apply to, where is it going to be used, right, as a potential, if that's your goal, because you could have a potential career in that if that's your interest. Some of you might have no interest in the industry. You could be just like, I just want to draw for myself. I don't want to work job in an industry or company. I just want to create my own things. That's fine. If it's a personal hobby of yours, then none of this stuff matters that I'm talking about. You just kind of do just what you do. But if you're interested in some form of industry or commercial, art career, whether small time, amateur level, or to small companies to bigger corporations, the idea is that it's being applied somewhere to make a product to be sold. And even if you are making your own thing and going to things like little trade shows and festivals and, sort of like small Comic Cons and selling your own prints and stuff like that, you're still making something. You're still making a product to sell. So it has an application. Again, is it a print of illustration? Is it a mini sketchbooks? Is it your mini comic book? What is it? Based on that, you got to be able to achieve the sort of, not the finality, but the comparison that competes to the kind of products that are out there in which you are going against. Because at the end of the day, when you sell your own stuff or anything, you are competing against other markets or other individuals to make money. Um, so it's got to be able to hit a certain level of quality and, you know, attraction to the eyes of individuals that are into that sort of stuff, whatever that you make. So both, you got to be able to, really enjoy the process of making it because that will give you the enthusiasm to keep going, right? And so no, you shouldn't also only just focus on just finishing things and making final products and selling stuff because you start to lose some of the creative enthusiasm because now it's all about like a business and stuff like this. It becomes a bit too tedium, monotonous, and not very interesting because it's the business side of stuff. So if you want to just stay creative, you can, but at some point, if you're independent, you will have to consider this. Because if you're going to sell anything at all, it does require that kind of consideration of mind. Um, but I think your question is totally appropriate again to just purely enjoy the process of things. But at some point, I think you will need to have that consideration of that other side. Moving on. DCAM 720. We met at Emerald City. That's cool. Um, yes, we are doing live streams. Welcome into the stream. Appreciate it. You saw some. Oh, this is from Tia or T Fleas or TF Fleas. Uh, you saw someone ask if you still pretend to be a student on a first day of class on an older stream. Are you willing to talk about those stories of pretending to be a student on the first day? Oh, I think maybe what you're talking about is back in the day when I was teaching at like Art Center College, and this is an in-person school. Not that I was pretending to be a student. I think people just thought I was a student, you know. But in terms of online classes, no, I haven't. I think I shared this sort of thought of it was just more of an internal thought based on the fact that I want to learn more from other people, you know, just like in terms of how they manage their online courses, what their online school is like, just to understand what's out there educationally and to be able to just sit in a class and listen. And so then I would be a student in a classroom. I wouldn't be pretending to kind of like, you know, take information and somehow in some way trying to, you know, come off as something else. No, it's not that at all. But in terms of back in the day when I was teaching in person, that I would be in a classroom, people would walk in and they would ask me, it's like, where's the instructor kind of thing. It's like, no, I'm an instructor. And so they thought I was a student at the time because I looked so young and I was young. You know, I started teaching art center back in 2010 and I must have been, what, 28 years old. And many of the students I started teaching, you know, they were in their mid to late 20s also. So I wasn't very much older than them. And so people just naturally assumed that I was just another student. But that's it. Nothing special. But in terms of you know, taking another class or sitting on another class at a school, I have not done that yet. I'm just interested in maybe being able to experience what else is out there. As I have my own online school right now, it's been, you know, working pretty well, and people have been very interested. I'm always curious as to like how it can potentially improve that environment in terms of instruction, experience, and immersion, or whatever the case is, to help grow it. And so it's more just about research, if anything else. Moving on. Remington's asking, you've been struggling to draw recently. No idea. I've seen, uh, no idea. You're saying I have. Seems good enough. Do you have any? So you're saying that you have no idea, and I'm assuming you're saying that you are good enough. Do you have an advice? Do I have any advice getting over that kind of art block? So the basic question is, how do I get over art blocks? Right? You haven't been drawing, and you feel, you know, like you're good enough, but you haven't been creating. So how do we overcome that feeling? Right? And these are very common questions and a legitimate question, and one that could be asked by any level of experience, whether it's someone who's been working in the field for 20 plus years or who's someone who's just a student trying to find their way through. All of us as artists most likely have come across those sort of moments in time of our growth at some point. And have I, you know, had those moments of experience of feeling this art block or something like that? I don't know if it's art block for me, but definitely this sort of um, the wall of continuing to work on something where I wasn't really feeling it, either because the piece I'm working on wasn't that interesting, or it was kind of more work oriented because it was something that I was forced to do for a class or something like that. But if it was purely my own thing, I never really lost interest and never had an art block when it comes to stuff like that. But when it comes to just working enthusiasm, in the school or in person, a lot of it, as I would always answer in the past, came from the sort of interactions and sort of the dynamics of working with people around me. So friends that I've had, you know, as we sketch together, we go to a bar or a cafe in the evening and hang out and talk and share ideas. And I've been doing this since high school with, you know, an old friend of mine. And I still like to do this today. Maybe not as much as I would like to, but it still happens, where we get to just hang out and sketch and draw, and we get to share ideas and pass along, you know, sort of interests of things and talk about movies or whatever the case is, and reinvigorates that creative sort of juice, and it keeps you going. So it's really just making sure you have that sort of energy around you, surrounding yourself with people that can help reinforce that sort of that that push beyond that art block, right? Now it's easy for me to say that, and if you don't have that community or people around you that are creative, again, it's like what can you do, right? I wish it was so simple you can just go out there and find people and just hang out and sketch with them, but it's not so readily available to some people. And that's just life, unfortunately. Okay, we have a little bit of this, but I'm going to leave a lot of this kind of go because I'm going to watercolor that a bit. What I want to do next is I'm going to start dropping in some darken lights. And so I kind of want this to be a little bit underlit. I think what I want to do is let's take, I have a bottle of ink here. This is just the carbon platinum. I've got a towel. I'm going to put away this pen for the moment. This was just for lining. And I have just a brush, the fountain pen maybe I can use here in a moment. I have a little tub of ink, I'm sorry, water, just fresh water, which I'll clean the brush with right now. And what we'll do is use just regular bottle of ink, this is the platinum, to do some of the dark accents. So I haven't really designed the lighting. It's a stylized light, right? So it's not realistic light. So we can kind of do whatever we want with it. What I'll do is just dip the brush into the bottle, wipe it off a little bit for the excess, and we're just going to hit this right in these areas. I don't mind losing details. I want to make sure the silhouette and the shape design stands out. Silhouette. That's the most important thing. The first read, silhouette. Details will not save the image. Clarity, communication through silhouette, shape design. Focus on that when you make your images. And the best thing to do in most cases when you get a little bit lost or confused, group things together. So I can place in all this like crazy detail information about the shape of his potential nose or something like that or whatever through the mask, but no, we're just going to group it. Group it. The underside of his chin, we're going to place a light on that. Sort of behind his neck, around this area. And just filling these parts out. I'm not worried about like how clean the edges and lines are right now because I can come back into it later on with the fountain pen or any other pen to kind of clean up edges. This is just for general fill. I'm just kind of seeing what's happening. This hasn't been designed. There's no sense of exactly what I want to do with it based on lighting. A lot of times I just want to feel through it. Hopefully it works. We'll see. The name of the game is whenever you feel like you're starting to noodle a little bit or get too caught up in details, you're thinking so hard, step back a little bit, take a break, breathe a little bit more, and then just start simplifying. Let's take the back of all this, group it, shadow. Even though I might lose a trapezius, it's okay. I might give just a little bit of edge of light on that. It's not even light. It's more just like a line that helps separate shapes. And that will give me the impression of that silhouette of a trapezius, but just on that side. There's always, this period in a piece of work where it has, I'm sure most of you know or heard of it, but it's kind of that ugly period, when you're working on something. It's kind of what this is going through right now. It's a little bit ugly. But the thing is, with more experience, you begin to be able to like rely upon your experience level, but also the understanding of how you can predict things, like what's going to happen at the end. And generally, I know that this is going to be okay. Despite certain self-doubts of like, I don't know about that part, I don't know about this part, I don't know what I'm doing over here, but it should be fine. Question from Benjamin. What did you focus on first when you started using a brush for inks? And do you enjoy using nibs and gel pens? I love using gel pens. Nibs are okay. I used to use them when I was younger quite a bit because it was just interesting. In terms of brush pen, what I used to use it for primarily was just a lot of character studies, portraits, people. It wasn't like a class I was taking for like brush pen work. It didn't exist. There were no classes of illustration that in the day, back in the day where I they would kind of talk about materials of brush pens at all. I think a little bit of interest of things like sort of language and calligraphy, especially when it comes to the Asian cultures. You know, coming from being Korean background, I kind of, I mean, I lost the sort of skill of remembering the Korean language when I was younger because I didn't get to use it as much. But over time, my parents kind of reintroduced it to me in my youth. This is before high school, going to like small little Korean school. This is for maybe like a month. And so I got reintroduced to the alphabet and that sort of stuff. And we were right. The actual, this symbol, I guess what would you call it, the characters, right? The characters and stuff like that. And so I sort of had that one little experience when I was very young to be able to help at least retain some memory of the Korean language. So being able to, memorize the characters and the sounds of them and also how it's put together. And thankfully I had that at the least. But that sort of stuff of writing characters in this sort of like, Korean language and Asian language, we were using brushes and whatnot. So I think even stuff like that were brush calligraphy, even then looking at things like Chinese paintings and Korean, sort of illustrations that are all like ink wash sort of stuff, uh, became also a big sort of draw of inspiration that wasn't necessarily me looking for it, but it was there, hanging on walls, in our parents' place or uncles' places, and I would see them, and I used to like look at them and copy them when I was a child. And I think that was some of the. It wasn't really even brush pen. A lot of them would just be like pencil drawings. But as I became older, like in high school and stuff like that, and I would play a little bit with brushes here and there, I would try to recreate some of that look. And then as I got to like art center, I would just play with it on my own, just on my own. I'm gonna silhouette his body here, so the back of the cape initially will start with a dark shadow shape. What I want to do with the dark and the light is to be able to contrast things so I can push things forward and backwards, but also silhouette or create sort of identifiable information. And again, it's not necessarily being designed to be realistic. So I can use these darken lights in any way I kind of want to. That both can be conveyed to the ideas of value and shadow and all that sort of stuff, but also as purely a part of design uh, to informationally show you certain parts of details. A lot of it is just purely stylistic, aesthetic. It just looks cool. Now, if I was trying to do like a photorealistic illustration, then you're gonna want to do a whole reference collection study, maybe like photo shoots, and use that as much as you can in terms of like one to one, because you're looking for something a bit different in that situation. Realism, hyperrealism, but based on the interpretation of our world, then I'm open to do whatever I want. We'll place a little bit of hatching in some of these areas. I'll go back to some of the questions here quickly. Rivers Arts asking, do I currently offer any mentorship programs? And I do offer mentorship programs. I only offer about 2 seats, maybe 1 or 2 seats per session of a class term. Right now, it's currently filled, so I'm not taking it at the moment because we are in class. Once the next round of registration opens up, then I will most likely open up the seat again. But I've already been doing pre-interview registration for that because there's already a long list of people waiting for the mentorship with me. How that works, obviously, as a mentorship is that we meet once a week for a couple of hours, and I get to work with them on live sort of calls like this, on hand towards whatever their intentions of focus may be. Whether it's most of the times it's like project building, a lot of sometimes it could be foundational. I prefer more project building type of stuff, but I'm open to potentially take foundational lessons from individuals. But that's usually in special occasions, and so I usually talk to people and navigate them as to like what they might want to consider doing instead. But usually with the mentorship that I offer, I have to interview you. I don't just take anybody, mainly because I want to make sure that who I am working with, I work well with. And what you are looking for is something I can actually help you with in the first place. So I don't want to just sign up with anybody just because you have the money to pay for it. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in working with individuals in which I can make maybe hopefully some advisement towards a direction that can be helpful. And so the mentorship is something that I don't take lightly. And as I said, there is a bit of a list at the moment. So I already have one or two students signed up, most likely two at the moment. I have to talk to the second one to kind of confirm again. But the first one is confirmed for starting of the next session, which is in October. But typically, yes, in the future, I will continue to do so. So if you're interested, just kind of like send me an email, shoot me a thought of like a pitch towards what it is you're trying to do. And I will always, I'll try to respond. It can be a little bit challenging because of the amount of contacts I get. Sometimes your stuff goes into spam, so I may not see it. So apologies for those of you that are hearing it. And if you send me an email, I don't respond. Usually the case. Um, I don't always check the spam mail. So, but I will try to. I'll go in there once in a while to make sure I didn't miss anything. Let's keep working at this. Right behind the chain, I'm going to put a cast shadow on it, which is just basically just dark marks right behind that. And all this stuff I'm going to start to kind of apply marker to watercolor. Kind of want to, again, have a low illumination sort of thing. So I'm going to make it maybe like green, sort of light coming up. I don't know exactly how it's going to look. So I can't visualize it just yet. Uh, but that's kind of the intention of the idea. As it's kind of bursting through this ground, there's like a light underneath it. So I'm hoping I'm applying the dark in the right area. That's all we can do. We just try. Above the leg, into the knee. Cable is asking, when it comes to animal studies in my class, is it okay to stick to cross hatching with black pens because I'm not in a position to find markers right now? I mean, yeah, for the wildlife class, you can use whatever you want. You can use pencil, ballpoint, pens, digital if you want it to be. The material list is open in the wildlife class. In terms of dynamic sketching, it is relegated to just the felt tip pens. Marker is a optional tool in which I recommend. And when it comes to the hatching, typically is actually more minimized in terms of how much we use because it is not a rendering course. It is a class on being able to build and structure things to draw through and to build a visual library and deconstruct the stuff that we look at. So in actuality, you're not going to be rendering that much in that class anyways. But the marker is purely more for being able to structure out things on the underlay level so it can help give you an understanding as to where to place it, the size of the drawing, the sketching, and also maybe how you can build it. So if you then mess it up, you can put the pen on top of that and adjust and clean things as you go. But that's typically how we use the marker in our class in dynamic sketching, which is a sketching tool, not as a rendering value tool. Will I ever do a draw together with David Finch, like I did with Rembert? Not that I have any plans for. I've never met David. I know of his work. I've seen his stuff when I was younger. He's been around for a minute, in comics, so I've seen some of his stuff, but I'm not that familiar to him. I've never met him. I know he's been to a lot of Comic Con shows, and I think we've been in the same sort of space and sort of stuff. But again, I've never come across to have a chance to really sit down and talk to the guy. From what I understand, he does have a YouTube channel where he does a lot of live streams like this as well too, which is great. But for myself, a lot of those kind of things are just purely based on sort of incidental, spontaneous sort of opportunities to be able to sit down and chat, and we get to meet people. But it has to be something genuine, where I get to meet those people based on that sort of organic, natural way, where I don't want it to be forced of like, hey, David, let's you like sit down and do some sort of live stream and make it. I don't know. I don't want to introduce myself in that way. If we ended up doing something because that's something we could do as someone we because we know each other, sure, but I don't want to start like that. Um, so if I meet him one day, it'd be great to sit down and just chat based on his being person to person, and get to know who he is. With Rembert, I'd met him, many times beforehand. So when he requested it, I was a little bit more okay with that. Um, but that sort of collaboration, sketching, kind of drawing things that it's not that common, and I don't mind doing them. But like I said, I don't like this sort of force sort of thing that because we have these two individuals that may be doing live streams on our YouTube that they should and have to do that sort of stuff. And again, I don't have a problem with it, but it's more just a thing where it's like I like having more of a dialogue, a conversation that can feel more genuine. Um, and I think meeting him more prior will be more ideal instead, where I don't want to start with the idea of like, hey, we should do something now. SJD is mentioning, am I drawing Spawn? I am. Do I have any thoughts on Ashley Wood? He's grown a lot in his work. And I guess not just like only recently. This is back probably in the last maybe 10 years. The very first time I saw Ashley Wood's work, I was a little bit like, on it. Not that it was bad. I mean, he was highly skilled. It was just that his work was so close, almost to like an exactness of one to one to another artist. And his name is Phil Hale. And Phil Hale's work is amazing. But he had these paintings, this kind of specific style, and the kinds of work that he will do that Ashley ended up doing quite closely of, which was fine. I don't, it's okay to have inspirations and style influence and stuff like that. But again, I'd rather just look at Phil's work. But then at some point, Ashley started doing the graphic novel stuff for Metal Gear Solid. And that's where I started to notice his work more there because it started to become a bit more as a sort of an identifiable thing that became more of his fingerprint. And that's where I started to respond to it better. I was like, oh, okay, that's really, it seems more like what he's really like. I mean, he, again, paints really beautifully and he can paint just like Phil Hale and he can paint his own stuff as well, too. But at the time, again, it's like I was so into Phil Hale's work that when I saw Ashley's Wood stuff in the beginning, I was just like, oh, that's cool, but Phil Hale, you know. So, but then the graphic novel stuff definitely, kind of interested me in his stuff more, and I got into his stuff mainly purely because of his figures, the 3A, is that what it's called? 3A figures. So I collected a few of those figures back in like the early 2000s and stuff like that, and I haven't bought anything ever since. And then over the many like the last decade, I haven't really followed his work that much. And I know he came to Comic Con this last year, San Diego, but I don't really know him. I mean, not really. I don't know him at all. So I never met him. But his work is cool. I mean, he's very skilled, like I said. And I think his work has developed and really grown into a very strong, identifiable style in the last, 10, 15 years. Question. Speaking of movies, what have I seen recently? I think for everybody, this seems to be one of those like trending um, sort of conversations now. It's like, oh, this is a year for movies, and everybody's going out in the theater. And I guess it's true because I have been going to more movies in the theater. Obviously, Odyssey was a really big one, but some of the horror films I've watched and some of them I didn't see in the theater. I caught them afterwards when they began to stream. And they were good. I think some of the ones that people were talking about, like Backrooms and Hokum and, Obsession and stuff like that. I mean, they were fun. I don't think they were necessarily game changing to me when it comes to horror films, but I did enjoy them. They were nice popcorn flicks. It was just fun to just watch a movie, and kind of get into the world of it. And out of those three, I actually preferred Backrooms more. Obsession was all right to me. I just wasn't that into it when it came to like the monkey paw effect. Somebody goes into a store, it's a monkey paw, and you can make a wish and that kind of thing. It's a very derivative story to me, which wasn't super interesting, honestly. So, but no, the actress did well, and I think it was filmed nicely. It looked fantastic, and some of the effects were really interesting, and the way they made it on a budget is always really fun. So, definitely give a lot of credit to it. It was a very enjoyable film. The Odyssey was one of those great, sort of nice, big budget movies, and back into the theater of a film that felt like the '90s in a way. Um, so I very much liked the Odyssey, despite people's, sort of. complaints about how it was made or the dialogue and the acting and stuff like that. Honestly, it was like you go into it knowing all that stuff, and it's fine. It's the way it was made, and that's what he wanted, and it works. So I enjoyed it. But it's always fun that because a story like that's been told for so many generations, and people still love those sort of great mythology, sort of storylines and classic stories that connect to the human condition, never go away. So very much enjoyed it. I went and saw it at the theater here in Glendale called the Alex Theater. And apparently that theater in Glendale didn't show movies since 1993, since Jurassic Park. And they converted it into more of a theater live performance sort of hall because it's just literally one screen and one stage. So since the 90s, they haven't shown a film and a movie there. But then for the Odyssey, they installed projectors, both 70 millimeter and a 35 millimeter projector. So I got tickets to see that one. I didn't see it in IMAX, but I liked seeing it on the 70 millimeter stock. It had that nice classical kind of movie noise and feel to it. The audio was kind of like echoey a little bit inside the hall, but it was fun. Beyond that, what else did I see? Spider Man. Saw that one. It's good. I want to go see actually Acme. I want to go see the Wile E. Coyote. I love Looney Tunes, and I'm really glad that movie's coming out. So I'm gonna go check that one out soon. Let's see. I'm gonna go back up to some of the questions. Muhammad is asking, you're going through the Dynamic Bible right now. What is the mentality you should carry going into the book? So the Dynamic Bible, which obviously carries a lot of my lecture notes and processes and how we use or how do we develop the tool set in being able to implement the dynamic sketching method to draw and sketch and study the many various subject matter that may be out there organically, naturally, or mechanically. And the kind of mentality that you want to be able to bring into it is with the mentality of basically with no expectation that it's something to expose you to a method of thinking, and it's not about being able to really draw and sketch better. That's going to be inherent by your mileage. If you didn't have that book and you just kind of sketched day to day, you're going to get better no matter what. So it's not really just about that. It's really about being able to see the world in a certain way, being able to strip away the surface level of detail and bring it down to its most primitive levels. So in the book itself, what you should be focusing on is being able to reinforce and create a sense of discipline and rhythm of the first chapter. A lot of the exercise, especially if you're a beginner, right? A lot of the exercises, the muscle memory, the movement, the materials, getting used to it, getting familiarized to that exercise and bringing in as a day to day sort of action. So that should be spent from weeks to months, just purely on that part, honestly. From there, the idea of being able to apply into the various subjects, which the two are in there in that book, which is cars and insects, which you can use, but you can use any subject that you want to. It doesn't matter. But it's, you can follow the book one to one. So just copy it first. Copy the book one to one, get the information down, get familiarized to the things I talked about, exercise, and then to the subject matter. Beyond that, go back to the beginning. Start over from step one. Do it again, right? The repetition is going to be the next the more priority of aspect to be able to kind of reinforce that muscle memory and the discipline that we talked about. So mileage, repetition, and from that becomes more naturalized. And then you're going to be able to sort of transition into various other subjects that you're interested in. So maybe it'll be humans or fish or wildlife or whatever the case is. The second book is done. So it will be out at the end of this year. That is the plan. We are going into the printing stage very soon. The book layout's all complete. All the images are complete. The text is complete. The design's complete. So we are going to be sending in, we're going through proofreading at the moment. So the second book, volume 2, will be out hopefully by the end of this year. That's the plan. I'm going to say with about a good, 85 to 90% of certainty that the second book will be out this year. Which also means, by the way, that the third book, volume 3, already has started. We're actually moving the fish chapter in the second volume over to the third, mainly because it ended up being too thick, and we want to keep the same price point and the same number of page count to the first one. So for those of you that were hoping to see the fish, sort of stuff that I showed you guys in the stream, that's going to be moved to the volume three, but volume three will also then come out next year. That's the plan. Lord Karat is asking, you teach, I've been teaching for years. How much have you changed up your method that I've been now teaching in the past number of years or the decades or so? Is my current online course the same as you had classes at Art Center, or did I change up the teaching style? Well, I mean, generally it's still the same, right? In terms of what the class subject matter and the method of thinking and the techniques are. There are certainly adjustments in terms of the verbiage, like the kind of words I use or what I like to explain, and definitely some editing as to what the content of the class I brought over to the online version. Purely because we had to sort of compress the amount of time because we are not spending 14 weeks like we will do at our Art Center class online. It's an 8-week course, and the reason I did that is purely because of the fact that we have students from all over the world that are of different levels of experience. So spending 14 weeks on a course may not be the most ideal for beginners because they may not have the endurance for it. So the class, as an 8-week course, I had to really pick and choose what I wanted to transfer over, but the sort of the expectation level is somewhat the same, but definitely in terms of what I do or what I explain is the same. Um, it's relatively close, but I think regardless if you've taken that kind of class in the past before in person or not, you're still going to pick something of it from the beginning, obviously. But if you're coming back into it, you'll be able to see it in new ways, and being able to get more mileage out of it will always reinforce your current sort of skill level. All right. Shreyan's asking, what brush am I using right now? This is a brush made by a company called Namura. And sorry, you can't see it there. Namura. And the name of this brush is called the Kosen. Kousen, small size. You can find this online. Namura Kosen. It's a Japanese brush. I found it in Japan, I think last year, at the end of last year, at one of the art stores. Just wanted to try it out. It's purely for inking, and it's a nice fine brush. At the moment, for those of you that are joining in for the night, we're doing a little bit of a illustration of a character for New York City Comic Con. So I'm doing some originals here. So I want some familiar characters, and we're doing a Spawn at the moment. Doing some inking. Did the initial line pass with the pen. And so we're doing some inking at the moment to get some of the shadow placements, and we're going to get into some color. I'm going to do a kind of an early pass of watercolor on this actually, and then we'll be using some marker after that, and potentially some colored pencil too. Will I finish this entire thing tonight? Maybe. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. At the moment it's midnight. I don't mind going for a little bit longer. It's Friday night. Tomorrow being Saturday. Usually weekend plans tend to be a bit open, but I have an evening planned. But I'm a late night person, so even if I wasn't really working tonight, I probably would be sleeping really late anyways. My average bedtime is probably like 2, 3 in the morning is average. And in terms of like when I get up, if I'm teaching a class in the morning, I'll be up by 9, 9:30 at the latest. Just got back from the gym, had dinner, washed up. I'm a little bit tired. A lot of that is because of having eaten and having worked out. So, but that's the thing, even though I'm physically a little bit kind of tired, like the eyes are a little bit kind of heavy, but I want to draw. I want to keep working on this. If I have time, if I have extra time, I always want to do this. There's nothing else. I actually played a little bit of games earlier today too, because today there was no class on Friday. So I had to finish up some commission work. I had to finish up some Dynamic Bible 2 stuff, create a new icon, do some proofreading. I got some freelance stuff to do this weekend. Um, but then I also sat and played on my PC computer game. I was playing Body Cam, that first person shooter one. I was very curious about it. Made me a little bit dizzy, but it was kind of cool. Yeah, someone is saying, is anybody else drawing while you're listening to me? Hopefully, all of you are sketching or drawing a little bit. Benjamin mentioned on the Odyssey that it jumped around too much. Well, that's his style, Christopher Nolan's method of filmmaking. I wasn't confused by it. I think it was fine. I think it was much more jarring in some of his other films. Like Inception, to me, was way more jumpy. His Batman series were a little bit like that. They weren't as bad, they weren't as jarring, but Inception definitely was that like that for me. It was like all of a sudden you're like in one place and another, and it wasn't really story based. It was just different locations. They were having just one conversation, but it's like in different stages of time. Um, it's an interesting way of how he shares dialogue between characters. Definitely didn't have that as much for me in his Interstellar film, but it still existed too. But it doesn't really bother me that much. Tick Tick is asking if you bought Tom Fox's form book. It's a good one. I've never actually looked at it, but I hear it's good to study from. And how do you study from an art book? It's your first time buying one. Well, honestly, just go by page to page and just copy directly. You know, the idea is to become familiar with what they're doing, and so go through it page by page and copy it one to one, as close as you can, and being able to then go back to some important components or things that stood out to you, right? From either note taking or by trial and error, or things that just you found to be fun to do, and try it over. Try to see if you can improve upon it based on quality or time or sort of the acuity and the closeness of accuracy. That's it. And then from there, it's like apply it, try to make your own things from it. If it's more about form building, make your own forms. If it's a figure, make your own figures. Draw from references as much as you want to. But the idea is application, right? Well, books, basically, you just have to have fun with them. And it's okay to skim. It's okay to jump from different section to section. Ideally, it is proper to be able to go from one chapter to another one, from page to page too. But again, grant, are you really going to do that? No. I mean, you're going to go from section to section. You're going to flip through it, find interesting stuff, and it's all right. Certain books I wouldn't recommend for beginners. Tom book for form should be all right, as far as I know. How much is the second volume of the Dynamic Bible going to be? The same price as the first one, because it'll be the same page count and the same price. So in the US, the cost of that book, I believe, right now is $40 US. So we didn't want to change that, but we also wanted to have the book on bookshelves to look nice and orderly, because we want to create additional volumes in the future. So we kind of imagine or visualized it where you see the series of the volumes sitting next to each other, and they create a nice sort of presentation. Um, Cover wise, we're just only changing the color. Obviously, the little icon in the center will change, and as we go from volume one to two to three, and potentially more into the future. At some point further, what we'll probably end up doing is do a collection of all the books and put into one master copy. And that would be like a giant Bible, which will end up probably being like 400 pages, because each book right now is close to 90. So if I do, like, let's say 5 volumes and we could put it all together, it'd be a massive book. But I'll be more for like collector limited. Maybe. We'll see. That's down the line. Jacob is asking for cross hatching. Do I use cross hatching to show form and volume in an illustration, or to soften strong blacks like in a comic. It's all based on intention of what you want. Once you understand the potential type of functions, you need to be selective and intentional and decisive as to how it applies. Does it blend edges of shadow and soften, form shadows, right? Or is it about being able to follow forms? It can be both, but it has to be very much intentional. My first suggestion when it comes to the building blocks of hatching and cross hatching is to be consistent. Once you make a choice, stick with that choice. Don't mix and match. That's usually the main advice in the beginning. Consistency is kind of key because it builds then sort of a building block and a collection of data in which you're going to be able to go back and look at and be more decisive as to what you want to carry over further into your own sort of like methods. As you'll take note, I don't really rotate the page a lot. I'm sure maybe you've noticed that. And why that may be the case is because it's more for the presentation of the stream. It's okay if you need to rotate the page. So if I'm doing certain things or not doing certain things, don't just assume that it's supposed to be that way. So, whether it's like certain materials or certain methods and steps that in formulas and how you create images and especially certain physical actions, um, there is really no right and wrong. It comes down to personal preference. So don't be overtly concerned of that sort of thing. So if you got to rotate the page, rotate the page. What I've learned to do is kind of move my body around it, know where to place my hand, know where to kind of start to work. We're just dipping ink into brush. Uh, Newly Boys asking, should we look out for the second volume on Super Ronnie? Yes, that's going to be the place in which where you could be able to buy a copy, but also pre-order it when we announce it. Because again, it'll be at the end of the year, most likely around November or so, where we have copies done, completed, and also on the cargo shipments. So look for more announcements closer around October, I would say. Um, but SuperRonnieUS.com is where you'll most likely get first crack access to it. This year, we're not going to be able to have it at certain shows due to timing. Ideally, we would like to have had it during at New York Comic Con, because I will be there, obviously. But unfortunately, we won't have copies at New York. So New York for me will be a lot of like originals, commission work. I mean, I'll have the first volume, and even though, despite the fact that many people who follow me, of course, already maybe have that copy, um, what I always get a little bit concerned by is like bringing back the same book and going to the shows that I've done multiple times, and it's like who's going to buy the book again? It's like everybody who always wanted it has it now. But of course, what I don't realize is the fact that there's many people that don't have it and don't know about it, so it's going to sell. And so I always get a little bit self doubty when it comes to stuff like that sometimes. So I wonder, it's like, should I even go to Comic Con? Like, should I even do the show? It's like, if it doesn't sell, why bother? I had a little bit of feeling of that during San Diego. Because again, I was supposed to have certain new books for the earlier part of this year. And I got a little bit like, I kind of wish there was some new stuff, but it ended up being just fine. But even for someone, of experiences of 20 plus years, and you can have those kind of mentalities or thoughts of, that's just not good enough, or, you need to do more, or just not enough. Favorite comic or manga artists? Let's just stick with one. Let's go to manga artists. I would say in my youth, I would, if I was to just like choose one graphic novel that I can take with me and look at all the time, to be honest with you, it still would be Alita, Battle Angel Alita by Yukito. I love that world and I love that story and I love the style that he had back in the 90s. Mohammed, thank you for your comments. Appreciate that. TF Fleas or TF Lees, TF T Fleas is asking for my video on the XP Pen, the Artist Pro 27, which I did a review on. Have I been using the slim stylus or the broader one? And I kind of flip flop one to the other for about a month or two. What I ended up settling it on is the thin stylus. And the only sort of like, I might have to do another video on this at some point, just to do a bit of follow up after months of using, the XP Pen. I don't mind the screen. The screen's nice, quality wise. It's nice and bright. It's a good resolution. It hasn't gotten any warmer or hotter. Um, but what I don't like is that the stylus nib does actually degrade really quickly. As I would talk to students online, they would confirm this. They would say the same thing. Like some of them also have XP pens. They say, yeah, their stylus nibs tend to kind of fade or sort of like degrade really fast. What seems to be the reason why is probably because the surface of the actual screen. From what it says on the 27, it has a little bit of like a paper-like or a little bit of texture to the surfacing of it. And I think that's what's kind of doing it. I'm only guessing. But basically, every time I use that stylus, after about, a month, maybe less, the actual stylus nib gets to a nub. It gets grinded down to a slant. Um, so I might need to do a follow-up video talking about that in terms of like, certain awarenesses and not really a problem, but just things to be considerate of. I've had to buy refill packs already. And Tonga Studio, appreciate the donation. Super chat. No questions there, but thank you again for jumping in. Question again here is, have I read Framed Ink? Well, I'm very familiar to the book. It's always on a highly recommended sort of library for students. But to be honest with you, I've actually never read it cover to cover. I'm very familiar with it. I've skimmed through it. I actually don't even own it. But from what I've seen, it always looked really great. And the reason why I haven't gone through it is because every time I go through certain books, I'm already somewhat, kind of familiar to the process of things. So that's why usually certain foundational books or educational books I don't really buy or pick up. Uh, the only ones I really would maybe invest in on are some of the more like antiquish books because I just like the way they're put together, just for the collectability. But informationally, I don't need it. But I should alter that mindset because regardless if I know it or not, there's probably something else I can pick up from it. So I really should maybe just sit down and just read through the book. But Marco, the artist, is very, very good. It's kind of got a feeling of illumination underneath, right? So all this dark on the top here, the chest being white, all this loose of detail. I want to put dark right here to the ridge center of the shin area, a little bit on the rock surfaces and the facing area too. But it does capture that sense that the underside is illuminated underneath the ground. That's kind of what I was going for. It does seem to have it. If I kind of squint at it from a distance, if I look at the screen also too, it does seem to retain this feel, this underlit look, which is good. So intention was there. Did it hit exactly? I mean, I don't know about exactly because I didn't actually have a picture in my mind, but I think it's close enough. Question from Mike. Thoughts on parallel pens? They're fantastic. Used to use them during art center all the time. The metal tip ones too. They're basically a chisel tip for calligraphy, and they're really good because in the corner you can draw very thin lines and get very thick lines on the face. So the parallel pens were a lot of fun because they're extremely sort of expressive and a lot of variants of line work. So I used to use them quite a bit for a certain period, and eventually, just kind of moved on. Different sort of tools kind of catch your attention. So I haven't touched those in years. Right here in the front of the shin guard, I'm going to place in these darks. We'll even kind of group together some of the spikes and lose some of the detail because it's all in shadow, so we don't need to retain and show everything. I'm still even considering going back and maybe like blocking all the stuff dark because it just gets a bit noisy in this area. I'm going to go back and simplify a bit more. What I'd like to be able to do today before we end is at least get our first color pass in here. Again, I wouldn't mind sitting and just kind of finishing this piece, but I'm going to be realistic. So I'll probably say that I think I'm going to try to do a color pass. Uh, After this sort of dark accent of shadows, I'm going to go in and start to clean up edges with the pen for the shadow shapes, and then we'll do a quick watercolor pass on it to get established local colors or lighting effect. And then eventually, when I get into the finish, which most likely will be tomorrow or this weekend, um, I'm going to play with some more materials, do some marker work, color pencil, just to give it that illustrative quality. For those that are jumping in right now, this is going to be used as one of the originals that I want to sell at Comic Con in New York. So I'm trying to fill up my portfolio book with a bunch of originals because it used to have a bunch of images in there, but over the last couple of events and stuff like that, it's been picked clean. So I got some pieces left, but I wanted to refresh it. Ali, big fan from Iran. Welcome. Glad you're here too. I have a lot of love for Iranian people. Noogie Boy's asking about the contents. In the volume two, it's going to have first chapter on the skeletal wildlife structures, and then going into military vehicles. So it's only two chapters, but each chapter is dense. So it's again 85, 90 close to pages in the book. Same page count as the first volume. So the chapters are expanded. Of course, you can go back to some of the earlier streams that will show you me finishing the book, and you get a sense of the way the book looks in terms of version art. Okay, let's go into this part of the hand, finish this up. Top of the hand, into the thumb. Just kind of moving that ink around. It's almost like you're guiding it. When it comes to watercolor and this sort of ink, I tend to kind of put a glob on there and I'll use the brush to guide it through, essentially. So it's not like filling in like a color book. You kind of carry it through. You help navigate it. That's the best way to explain when it comes to things like wet media. You help just kind of guide it into its position. You can't force this kind of material sometimes because it kind of wants to go where it wants to go, especially if you use more like a wet on wet approach with watercolor inks, um, ink wash or something like that. Then it becomes a bit more chaotic. But a lot of times it's good just to kind of let it do its own thing. So don't force it, don't fight it. Sort of assist. Muhammad's asking about taking notes in art and you try to take notes, but you feel like it's so different than other endeavors, you've taken notes in. Well, a lot of it is being able to have your ears peak once something is heard, listened to, or read that stands out, that kind of catches your attention. And this can be difficult in the beginning because you're not sensitive to it just yet. You're not really aware of how much of importance it may have, but a lot of times it can be purely aesthetic. It just looks interesting. What that person did looks really cool. So it kind of just piques your interest again, right? Pops your ear up. And from there, you kind of, establish the sort of the notes in the sort of the larger sense of steps that helps you understand the formula based on that, right? Of how to acquire the outcome of what that artist may be doing. So it's formulaic information you're looking for, the main steps of things. But you can't jot down all of the notes of information. And I'm also talking about it in a way where it's like a live class. When someone's talking, let's say like me right now, I talk quick. And there's a lot of information. You can't get all the information down at one sitting. So the idea is to be able to just gather the main points that stand out to you, and don't worry about the small bits of details, and just focus on being able to also interpret it, word it even in your own way if you have to. Break it down to its main sort of like essence, and from that it can maybe go a bit quicker, but don't go into the mentality of trying to record all of it because you're not going to get it. It's going to be missed. But also at the same time, it's really more about stuff that stands out to you at the moment because this is being recorded. So you can always just go back and watch it again and just kind of go into the more details of like, what did he talk about in that part? Or you missed the dialogue information of this section. And so you can get that detail later on. So don't panic and don't worry and don't rush. Just be a little bit sort of mindful and be attentive to certain bits of information that stand out most to you. And so you build that sensitivity up by, being involved and participating in these sort of things more and more. So whenever it happens, it's not just me, of course, right? Other sort of streams, other sort of live events. You might go to like a workshop, you might take a class. Then those are the opportunities in which you start to continue practicing this. And like anything else, it's a skill you practice. It is a skill. All right. Those parts of the hands are done. I'm gonna group this area more together because it was a little bit too spotty and chaotic. And I kind of want to almost do the same thing over here. Just group all this together, the darks. If I want to show a little bit of illumination in the shadows, bounce lights and stuff like that, I can bring in some other materials. I have like color pencil that'll work really well. Not with paint, probably color pencil. I've recently been using the color pencil a bit more. In the garage, we've been able to like acquire certain materials, and now that we had some setting in, markers, paints, color pencils, it's been nice dabbling in on it again. Because typically it's not really my go-to. Most of the times when I'm doing mobile or commission sort of stuff, mobile work, off-site, it's a lot of watercolor. I'm going to bring this up a little bit close to the camera so you can kind of see it. Making some minor adjustments for symmetry. We'll place a very thin hatching up in here to fill this side underneath the chin. So it'll be illuminated, but I can also use hatching a little bit because I want this to be brighter as it goes a bit darker. And then I'm gonna have his eyes kind of shine. So the hatching is now kind of one directional. So I'm thinking of it as a radial effect. Think of it like a sun in the center here, and it's brightly shining through. So these are like rays of light. I'm not going to overdo it with the hatching. We're just going to keep it more to the top. So as we continue going down, I'm going to hatch less and less. Just checking the hand once in a while. So I'm not smudging anything. There's a little bit of wet ink right there. So I'm also being mindful like where I place the hand. The brush is being a little bit drier now, less ink, so I can be even lighter with it. Oh, back to some questions. River, appreciate the comment about the Guyver post. A question here about have I thought about making a book of just my own work? Well, of course, absolutely. I mean, the last time I did a just a plain old art book was back in 2015, and that was my own publishing at the time. And we have plans for other books coming up this coming year, not just the Dynamic Bible, but other sorts of books that will be art centric purely. I have done a graphic novel of my own as well, and that was again a self-published thing, which I want to come back into in the near future of continuing that story. That's the blacksmith. Sorry, there's a little bit wet spot right there. I can feel it. I'm touching it. But other than that, no other immediate plans for a larger collection. Um, we'll see. Hopefully, there's future plans for it. Okay, let's go into some of the rocks down over here and just fill in some dark sections. Because the light was on the inside, I want the front facing us to be dark. We're using the side of the brush right now, so I can get a bit of texture as well too. Grouping. So stuff like this, I'm forcibly designing it to be dark and light. So, I mean, technically, this would all be like in shadow, so you wouldn't see anything. But I'm creating this sort of contrasting. So visually, a design, I can convey to you plane change, front plane, top plane. And we'll just trail this off as an indicated level. So on the edges, we can start to see little crevices of rock, silhouette shapes, and it turns into sort of nothing. Down here, we'll continue with a little bit of watercolor to continue to communicate more of rock form, texture. Did I sketch before or just imagine and calculate the mind and then draw? So a lot of this is very much just thought about, especially the lighting, all this sort of stuff is just processed. But there are certain pieces, if I go back to, let's say, the other illustrations that I was showing you guys earlier, like this one here, this one was penciled first, and then inked, then watercolor, and then color pencil. This one was straight ink, and then marker, color pencil. The process of this one is straight ink, and then watercolor, color pencil. So it'll vary in process depending on, in that moment, how I feel or what I want to do. Question here about world building. Speaking of world building, any advice? Fictional worlds, characters, your method so far. 9 weeks of drawing is to make mini drawings of with notes in Krita, but it's pretty chaotic. Well, I mean, it's a big loaded question when it comes to that topic because I could literally teach a class on that and speak on it for hours on end. But we'll keep it to just maybe one bit of advice when it comes to world building. The main skill there really is research, and it can be chaotic because you're going to have so much to consider and think about. And that's one of the difficulties, but the enjoyments of world building is that you have to consider the functions of the world basically all the way down to its elements of things like materials. What are the base materials that this culture and this world uses? What's the world physics rules, right? Is it like earth? Is it some alien planet? Is it some fantasy thing? Is there magic, right? So I think about all those components. What's the technology level? What kind of society is it? What's the sort of like the social status kind of consideration? Even things like political aspects. Is it a monarch? Is it a democracy? Is it a dictatorship? Or whatever the case is. And then based on all that, technology and materials will kind of drive the visual elements of it. That's based on the rules of the world, and from that, you can also then go into the sort of the visual tying of things. So, but research is everything. So, looking at our own world and our own history will give you sort of like the examples of what has been around and what is also possible. And you can use it as an inspiration to be able to generate your own iteration, whether as an alternate or as an inspiration from that directly. But as I said, researching skills become pretty much the main component of it. And you could spend months, if not years, purely doing that. But at some point, you have to start visualizing. So being able to recognize that critical moment of being able to transition from research to visual is tough for some people, especially if you lack the experience of it. But it is an important component in terms of what we do in the industry. In one of my first, not first, but higher jobs, it was my second, no, third job, full time in game studios. This is down in San Diego. I think 3 months of my work when I first got hired on a game was to just research based on the alien planets and the different sort of plants in the world and the flora and the fauna and that sort of stuff. Even though it wasn't even released in the game, it was to be able to just establish the rules of that world or the various worlds. Let me clean the brush real quickly. And usually I'm just kind of like, relatively general about it. As long as it produces a clear enough. A lot of the little gray here is from the side of the actual brush. So we can actually even just kind of pick it clean like that. Wipe it down again. And then we'll just come into a point and let it dry. I'm going to close the bottle link. And what we're going to do is bring in either my fountain pen tool or I'm going to bring in the plastic nib. Let's try the plastic nib first. What I want to do is just clean up some edges real fast. And then once it kind of dries out, then we'll do a watercolor pass. Virat's asking, do I have any suggestions of a roadmap to sketching from imagination? What things need to focus, what you need to focus on more to learn how to do that essentially. This kind of question will pop up at least, once or twice in the stream. The sort of the interest, dare I say, even like the assumption that this imaginative sort of approach to creating images is sort of the penultimate or the ultimate goal for many illustrators and creatives. And a lot of it is driven by the fact that what you're observing on like social media and what people tend to do, even myself, tends to establish that sort of working formula, working method, right? We tend to kind of create a lot of that stuff out of our minds, whether actual known things as subject matter or original things that we create out of whatever inspirations that we have. When we say drawing from the imagination, I think a lot of it is also trying. I think what you're trying to convey is the fact of how do I draw things out of my mind without looking at stuff. So Imagination, if we define that, is more about creating something that is, let's say, something that doesn't exist, right? Fantastical stuff, even sci-fi things, sci-fi fantasy, things that can be sort of close to the things that we have in our own world, right? Like functions and animals and biological stuff, the mechanical things. They're things that we can recognize based on a comparison to what we have in our own world. But we're trying to generate something unique um, we seem to use that word originality, but creative stuff that we are establishing it into our own story or our own world. I would call that more to the imagination. We're trying to imagine things that don't truly exist right now. So we want to hybridize or get inspired by and create these sort of visuals. But drawing from the imagination is when we say that, I think what people are trying to talk about is how do I visualize, right? How do I begin to visualize the things that we are drawing and sketching, whether it is that we are creating from it, or how do I even like recreate it out of my own head without having to turn to looking at things. I think that's really where the sort of the question originates from and what the main concern is in terms of what this is about. We talked about this last session, so I don't have to go too deep into it again, and I don't mind answering it. But the idea again is the fact that in education, we want to learn the fundamentals about being able to build, construct, understand methods and techniques, to be introduced to the histories of art and how people and professionals have worked, and also what kind of work you end up doing and how it's applied and where we go. The byproduct of what we do foundationally may yield the result of being able to visualize more out of your head. So let's say drawing figures in pose, right? Or imagine characters in a certain shot of camera, creating scenes of interaction, but taking props and animals or backgrounds and characters and put them into this illustration or image or sketch where we can freely explore and express onto the page without having to resort to looking for this perfect referencing photograph that we always have to get dependent upon. And I understand the sense that it feels like it's a weakness where you have to always turn to something like that, but that's not the case. You can't have that kind of mentality or mindset in this situation because it's going to drive you crazy. Due to the fact that what you are expecting yourself to do may not even really be your best method of process, anyways. Because when we talk about drawing from visualization out of your head without the use of constant references, it's not the best way. It's just a way. It's just something I can do, but it doesn't make me better than somebody else. It's just a method of creating. I think it's just that people have been it's been hammered into your mind that somehow that it is better, you know. But the, the only thing that you can define as being better or worse is the sort of like the I don't want to say finality of the outcome, but it kind of is that the piece that you create and what it then applies to, right? Does it complete the job? I guess is the best way to put it. Because if it completes a job, then it's fine. That's really the more important part. You got to get it done. And that's why if you're doing homework or if you're making your own thing, you have your own deadline, if you're working for a client or a company, that's the most biggest priority is to be able to complete the work. So the method of approach and process can be uniquely yours. And you can work in any way you want to, right? So in any case, think more in the side of like, how do we, of course, and then what if it is that question? How do I visualize better? And what is the roadmap to that? And is that bad to be able to prioritize or emphasize that interest towards it? Of course not. And so it's totally fine to be able to spend a lot of your energy and time to be able to reinforce and to build a skill set, eventually to be able to yield the result in drawing more out of your head for the visualization technique. And so how can we do that? Well, that's where, in dynamic sketching, we talk so much about the visual library. You can't draw or sketch and create out of nothing. There has to be observation. You got to see the things. If you've never seen it, how are you supposed to actually know what it is? So then we always then have to turn to the reference. You have to turn to the images. You got to see the real things, go on location somewhere, draw constantly. And is there then a certain guaranteed amount of time? And there is not. For some people, it might take them a lifetime. For others, it might take them 10 years. For some, it might be just two. There's no way to know. It's purely an individual as a road path that you take. And then that's where, as people said earlier, you then fall in love with the process of doing it. And because you enjoy the process of making it, the time slips away. That doesn't become the priority or the stress or the concern anymore. And you just do. And by just simply doing, over time, at some point, you come to the realization, oh, hey, I can just draw this thing now, right? That's kind of just how it happened for me. There wasn't a goal. It was just a byproduct from the day-to-day sketching from numerous years to decades and being able to sketch directly with pen. That's all it is. So treat it that way if you can mentally, mindset wise. So that way it doesn't necessarily drive you to this craziness of chasing this thing where chasing it is not going to give you the result. It has to be a very natural progression. I'll also say it like this. Like, let's say it is more forced. Like, you train and create these sort of examples of exercises that puts you in this environment in your own sort of like space of challenging the visualization techniques. And would you get better at it? Most likely, yes. And if that's really a drive and hunger, you're going to be able to sort of conjure it in a way, because the intention of that is so strong, the drive is so strong. If anything, you'll be able to acquire that skill faster. And so then there's another factor to this: drive. If your drive and thirst and hunger for it is that much greater because it's so important to you, you'll get it. But this wasn't the drive for me. Again, it was a byproduct, which is why it took me over 20 years to get to where I am now. But if you're saying, hey, in 5 years, I want to do what you're doing, good luck. I hope for the best. But do I have a roadmap for you in terms of how you can do that? No. That's a personal pathway. You will discover it on your own. I hope that makes sense. Do keep in mind that everything I'm talking about here is personal opinion. It is not about right and wrong again. It's just mostly acquired from information and data by observing people, talking to students, tens of thousands of students for the past 16 years of teaching. So you can take my word for it based on that kind of experience or not. For those that are kind of coming in at the moment, what we're doing right now is cleaning up the image a little bit. We did some ink fill with brush. This is a character for Spawn. Just doing a character illustration collection of work. So after the brush, we're just going to the edges and doing a little bit of adjustment, refinement, edge cleanup, a little bit more hatching. This gives me a bit more of the fine control. Well, the brush is also really fine, but this gives me a little bit more of a consistent line work, where the brush can be a bit more organic. In terms of what direction to hatch into, you really only have two options. Well, no, three. The first option is the common, which is go with the form. Second option, go with the surface of the flow. That's like texture. If the hair flows in one direction, you hatch in that direction. Third, it could be influenced by graphics. So graphically, it could be vertical, horizontal, diagonal. You just cut out the shadow shape and hatch it so. This is radial. So from center out, I'm doing a radial hatching, which is supposed to kind of like convey this idea of a light source coming underneath. Everything is then based on intention. We're not going to hatch way too much more to this. I'm still just focusing on edges right now, filling it up. And I'll get my watercolor out and we'll do a quick pass. I do want to bring in some marker, but in terms of the working order, I recommend you work with watercolor first, then marker. Zero, yes, there is another second volume coming out into this year. Maple is asking, says, it's going to be both ink and colored pencil. Am I using vellum or smooth paper? This is watercolor paper. Cold press watercolor paper. 11 by 14. Right now on the other side, a little bit of ink came through. Just a little bit. Once I use marker, it should bleed through entirely with the um, alcohol-based marker ink. Watercolor, it'll just buckle a little bit. This is a stage where it's kind of more just like looking for small little bits of things to fill, clean up, edge control. It's not the most visually interesting as you guys are watching, which is why I'll keep trying to answer questions because in this part it's really not so large in terms of movement and construction, but it is a necessary step because it gives me just a bit more refinement and polish to the edges of line and completions of shape. And of course, on the video, you're not going to be able to pick up all the small stuff I'm seeing, but from where I'm at, looking at the image, I can see all these little pock marks and little holes and cavities and things that are not necessarily filled properly or edges that are rough. And I'm using this pen to be able to just shave off a little bit, fill. Right now we've gone close to 2 hours, which is about close to typically how long we go. We typically go about 2.5, 220. So like I said, we're gonna move to the watercolor here as the last phase. I think I've seen some streams like even Jim Lee will stream once in a while. And I've seen his old ones where I didn't watch all of them, but I know he has them. But he would go for like 6, 7 hours on some of those. Like, holy crap. Um, Finishing up like a commission or something like that. I don't think on YouTube we've gone that long. Some of my classes will go much longer, but YouTube videos I try to cap it to about 2.5, 3. Do I ever feel like art becomes work at some point in the career? Yes. And do you embrace that and acclimate to it or do something else for a time when it occurs? Yes, also. Because inevitably, if you are working in the industry, that then becomes much like work. Even though it can be creative and it can be very fun in the beginning, but over time, it can become a grind because it goes through stages. Stages of the early phase of being able to be creative and have a lot of input, but then there comes a stage in which you have to be able to refine and apply it to then the final product. So then it goes through that, sort of shift and becomes much more monotonous and not as interesting creatively. And it's just purely just sitting there, kind of like this. This is not that creative what I'm doing right now. It's just me little filling in little holes and cleaning up edges. It's not that fun. It's mindless, but I can definitely fall into a zone where I'm not really thinking very much and I just kind of react, right? It's therapeutic. It can be very calming for some people, but it's not the most creatively interesting. But in other cases, like when you're working on something you don't like to work on, that's usually the case when it falls into that category. It becomes like work because it's not what you want to do. When you're told to do something, you don't like it. Again, it doesn't matter how creative it can be, you'll still have a little feeling of sort of this urge to resist. Um, so in that situation, typically, we fall back on our training so that we're able to complete the job in a timely manner, which allows us to be able to also hopefully have enough time to be able to fall into other things that can be as creative, even in the job. So if I'm at a studio and I get to finish up some of the work, and have extra time left over, they might say, "Oh, maybe you can play with these concepts or give us more ideas of this one." I'll get to sketch and play around and draw and sketch and that sort of stuff. That makes it much more interesting. Or, when I go home, then I can obviously work on my own thing. But you need to incorporate and balance out many stuff, which is the importance of making sure that you invest in your own interests, which I didn't do so in the early part of my career. Not until more opportunities of things like Comic Cons came around. Then I started to invest in creating more things of my own stuff. But that was like around 2008. And before that, it was just purely going to work, clocking in, clocking out, going home, go to the gym, just play games and hang out with a friend or two and go to bed. And that was it. I feel like this is making me a bit tight. I'm going to bring in the fountain pen a little bit here. So this will give me more variation of line. And I think I'll be able to apply a little bit quicker, which already feels that way. Sometimes using a super thin, fine nib is not ideal because, again, it kind of puts you in this mode of being a bit nitpicky. So breaking it up a little bit, using some broader tips, brush pens sometimes, big fountain pens can help adjust your mentality and go back into larger sort of movements. We're going to play a little bit of hatching inside these rock areas with this. Ella Dan is asking, saying, your background's in miniature painting, Warhammer stuff. Any advice on how to approach the bigger movements required when drawing? Work larger, essentially. The larger you work, the more canvas space you have, the more arm movement you're going to be able to get in. So working tiny and small, which, for your Warhammer stuff, you're going to go into super tiny little spaces. It's super constrictive. It's going to influence your sketching and drawing. So I'd actually would alter it in terms of material and bring in some larger paper and alter your materials too. Things like brush pens, markers, big sort of like graphite pencils and stuff like that. That's what I would be doing. These big chunky hatches. What's an animation project that you saw and were like, wow? Well, actually, from Superani, Nicholas Namiri, who lives out in, I believe, Shanghai right now, was working on that really beautiful short animation for this company. I don't remember the studio name, but it's kind of his own sort of design and creation of a world. It's got that tiger head character. Again, I don't remember the name of it, but they made a short animation which was really quite beautiful. One, because they really adapted his style so closely, and his style is extremely fluid, and best way to put it is a bit chaotic, but very organic too. But it works. And the way they adapted it to 3D to make it like a 2D animation was really nicely done in terms of design and feel. Story was, it was a short little story, but it was cute. But visually, it was definitely captivating. Nicholas Namiri. Look for the animation of his stuff. He didn't animate it; he designed it, but the studio that he worked for obviously backed it. I might come back to this question in a second, Vico, about mental block and burnouts. And Royet's asking what to know if learning industrial design helps in other design aspect like anatomy to figure. Well, if you're learning industrial design, I think learning some of the traditional illustration methods can be very good for you. Again, when I taught at Art Center, I actually taught under the product design department first, teaching dynamic sketching. So those design students in product design were learning about how to sketch from life, animals and vehicles and various things, because being able to capture the world around you, highly important, even drawing figures. So if you're going into the industrial design side, yeah, illustration classes in general, figure drawing and that kind of stuff, I think would be great. I wouldn't focus on being too specified as to like what specific class to take. Anything of interest on building figures, I think would be fine. Just to introduce to you some of the other kind of methods of the way you can visualize within those classical traditional means. Okay, we're close here to getting everything ink-wise generally established. Just kind of looking around to see if anything I want to touch or hit. But the brush did a lot of the work for me. All right, before I get sucked into any other small little things here, let's jump over to the watercolor. What we're going to do first is I'm going to hit it with, I have a little heat gun here, and this heat gun will kind of dry out the rest of the ink, so excuse the sound and the noise. Normally, you'd want to use a hairdryer because heat guns will go way too hot, but as long as you're moving it, you should be fine. So, doing a dab test, smudge test. Okay. So I'm going to bring in my little watercolor set here. I have a rag, which I'll use to clean the brush, which I'll put on this side. And there's already some watercolor going on in here at the moment. The water is a bit cloudy, but it's fine. We'll keep that there. And I will clean the surface just a bit. Brush wise, what I'm going to use, I just grab one of my little Chinese brushes here. This is more for calligraphy, but I can use it for watercolor. It's nice because it retains a lot of water. Harry, glad to hear that you've been continuing to practice dynamic sketching method after 3 years. Keep it going. And Blast Radius, looking forward to it. Okay. Spawn has a red cape. His natural sort of leotard, his costume is like black. His gauntlet and boots are red. He does have this white, like M shape here on the chest. So color-wise, it's not too complex. And these parts on the mask are white. The lighting of this, growing out of it, is going to be this sort of like green. This, you know, sort of, not sickly green. I want it to be a bit more luminous looking. So in my watercolors, these are all my greens over here. What I'm going to do is just kind of check them out real quickly. And I do have a scrap piece of watercolor when I cut it out. So what I'm going to do is just take some and just put it on there. Just to see it. This one's a little bit more cooler. It's like a viridian. This one's more like a turquoise. These are my warmer greens. That's like a leaf green. And this is my olive. So these two I won't be really using. I'm gonna go more for my sort of neon-y yellow there, or green right there. So first, I'm just kind of testing it out. Because the lighting here is going to influence a lot of this, what I want to do is do a pass of the lighting tonality, and the local colors will come in through in-between sections and the shadows. And so the light's going to influence everything. So I'll do the green on this side, even though he's a red cape, we're going to go green with the lighting. And there'll be edges or a little bit on the inside where the red will come in. Here at the base of it, it'll be quite light, so I want the white of the paper to come through. So I'm not going to cover it all with green. So I want to just add a lot of water over here. With watercolor, the idea is that you want to use a lot of water. Water is your best friend. And then you can build to, some of the thickness of the paint. If it's out of a tube, it can be much thicker and opaque. Uh, Shikiku, will I ever come to France one day? I've been multiple times, many times actually, and I love being in France. Paris is obviously where most of my time is spent. And there's a school out there I spend a lot of my time in called the Beaux-Arts School in Paris. We are actually still in talks, and there may be a chance, hopefully, next year, not this year, that I will try to visit um, Paris. Because I did enjoy doing the workshops out there with them. Used to do it usually like once a year, but I haven't done it since COVID times. So like right there, there's gonna be this bright light. So when I just hit the edges outside of that green, what I can also do is bring in. This is a second brush. Let's use this one, and just use water only. And I can use this to kind of move around the watercolor on the edge, just to soften it. Notice underneath his abdominal area, there's the white, which is the underside, the green to the top side. The thing is, his iconic sort of costume in the center of the chest, I'm not really that worried of getting it. Um, if we have a chance to be able to build it in there with color pencil later on, that's fine. I am going to hit this with maybe a little bit airbrush too, with the white airbrush paint, so I can kind of glow this a bit more. That's later. This could be a little bit of edge rim light. I'm going to remove some of that paint right there. So if you work wet, you can always lift it. You can take some paper towel. Even right now I can still do this. Like right here is a bit strong. I can lift that paint off. All this underneath here, green, green, influenced by the light. Underneath the cape here, green. Uh, Mahath is asking about practicing drawing scenes and usually run out of depth. Any tips on how to show more? Shape design, right? Simpler details, more information and contrast of details, much less information of detail and more shape design to the back. Simplicity of shape. Because I was asking, you wanted to know if there was any method of drawing or some subjects you don't enjoy. For myself, um, subject matter wise, no, not really. In the past, when I was younger, it was landscapes, exteriors, building structures. Never liked them. I don't mind them as much now, but I guess I would say that those would be the things I wouldn't turn to immediately, even though I can do it. We're just using one color. When it comes to painting, I think even starting that way traditionally, which is to go monotone painting, focus on value structure, and paint with just one color. Make it cool or warm. Monotone painting is how we started in the past. We would do value painting first and then introduce one color. Then we go to things like complementary, or we do things like limited palettes. In the past, we primarily start with oils, then moved into acrylics. And you can do this today with like digital if you want to, and even watercolor if you want. Here on the edge of the rock, just going to catch that green light. On the inside of the cape, we'll put a little bit of green as well too. As it gets to the edge on the outside, we'll do less and less. The intensity of the light will get lost. So use a bit more water to soften it. First pass, I'm going to intensify some of the green at the base over here. This is just the first layer. Do I ever listen to music when I draw? Sometimes. It's not very common though. When I was younger, it was like at school, I would definitely put something on. These days, I prefer to have shows, movies or shows. I would do that in my student times as well too. But it was a bit of a mix between music or sort of like some visual thing, rarely visual. I just like having something to watch in the background, even though I may not necessarily watch it. Okay, let's add a bit of this green. This is a little bit more intensive, a bit darker. Mix it with the previous one. Come back in here. Just for some of the intensity. Second layer. After the second layer is done, I'm going to go with the brush with just water alone and just kind of soften, group some things together. And then we'll place a couple of local colors. I thought about doing some influence of a secondary light, but I'm not going to do that. Now with the watercolor on top, with the pigment of the watercolor on top of the ink, it is going to sit on it. You're not going to be able to see it on the camera very well, but I see it. So at the end, the very last stage is being able to reapply a bit of ink. The color pencil will help a lot in terms of neutralizing that effect. But if I wasn't using color pencil, I would go back into the ink. And that will help get some of that rich dark again. These sort of live streams end up becoming like classes, and I don't always techniques and things I can share and talk about end up becoming very instructional. Hopefully, you guys are enjoying that. Free lessons. Maybe it'll entice you to join the class one day. These YouTube videos, as we have a lot, spending many hours just sitting together, going to instruction, demos, feedback, um, live demos both on paper and digital. So if you've never taken an online course, and if you're interested in the foundations, um, have confidence that I've been doing it long enough to be able to coordinate and organize a class. Have I always used pen since? And at what point was it your go-to study material? It was, but it was primarily a ballpoint pen during my 20s. Before that, in my high school years, it was a lot of pencil underlay, pencil sketching, pencil drawing, pencil underlay to ink on top. Because at the time when I was in high school as a teenager, I wasn't taught, techniques and methods. I just assumed that was the way to do it. Kind of looking at comic artists and stuff like that, because back then there were a very limited amount of resources of things I had. And I think, me and my friend would discuss and talk about things, and we shared notes about how it could be done. And naturally, we gravitated towards the ideas of, like, pencil underneath, inking on top. And inking was purely for cleanup, polish. That's what inking was for us. But as I went into art center, ballpoint pen rendering was a big thing. In illustration, a lot of the illustrators would render that way. So I kind of fell in love with it, and followed the trend that everybody was doing, which was ballpoint pen sketching. So I did that for a little bit, and that wasn't really of a thing of my own personal interest. I did it because everyone else was. So I was just kind of being a what do they call those? Lemmings. So then during dynamic sketching, which was the second year, is when I got introduced to just straight pen sketching. And since then, I fell in love with it. And that was 22 at the time, 23, when I started doing that a lot more. And I never looked back. Even though I still did use ballpoint and pencil, of course, depending on the class. Sometimes it would be, graphite and charcoal because we're using them in the course. But my primary sort of tool set ended up becoming just felt tip pen. And since then, it's been the main tool. So as we've done one color, let's go into some of the sort of the secondary, not second, I'm sorry, the second read of colors, which is the base layer, the local colors of the material. So like the cape over here is red. So what I'm gonna do is grab some red on the side. We'll just play with it and see what kind of reds we have. I don't know the name of some of these paints, honestly. The one above it has a bit more of a violety look to it. These aren't bad. This one's a bit more purpley. What I'll do is mix in a bit of a dark, like a burnt umber or a lamp black, to kind of just drop this a little bit. Let's see how that looks. Water it down a bit more. I want to just do a pass, a wash. The green might even be a little bit wet still. So I'm going to treat this with the material where there's like folds and bends, and there could be parts in which you have less of the light hitting it, so that can be more red. Where more light of the green is hitting it, that becomes more green. So light layers first, we build to the saturation. Use a lot of water in the beginning. And don't be afraid to just go in there and play around. And the reason why you don't have to be afraid of it is because even if it doesn't really work out, it's a learning experience. You'll know what maybe not to do next time. And if you don't know what to do next time, you do it again, and hopefully you'll come across that information or data more as you go, because you become more familiar. Easier said than done, right? Having the courage just to throw paint on there and see what happens. But the thing is, because this is a transparent media, with the green underneath it and the red on top, the green still influences the color. So typically in painting, you usually want to even just pick a single color that you intermix it with every paint. Or you have it as a base tone, and so as you paint on top of that, and it's more translucent, the color underneath it comes through. So it helps unify the overall image. So this green, even though I place in things like reds or let's say darks and blues or whatever the case is, the green will influence the entire thing. Because especially with watercolor, it's a transparent media. So all these spikes in over here are part of the cape. go back and get more paint. And with watercolor, it will dry lighter. So if you think it's like a deep red, eventually as it dries, it'll lighten up. So you always have to layer it, more layer, more pigment, because there's a lot of water. Layer after layer after layer. I'm going to keep the background white. I'm trying to create these like very sort of clean silhouette images. So I want the theme of multi-characters as I create images to have almost like a very similar presentation. Stylistically, I may change things around. Materials, I'll also use different things. But the one thing I will do is that I won't really do a lot of background stuff. It'll be purely character centric. Kristen, the watercolor brand is Holbein. Yes. I use two brands. One is the Holbein, the other one is the Schmink brand. But there is a Korean watercolor that I have as well too, which I don't remember at the top of my head. This palette that I have right now was a gift from Hyunjin, Kim Hyunjin from Superani, who's the manager for our team, and he gave it to me for my birthday years ago. And this is kind of his palette. It's lasted for years. Like I've only refilled a couple of these paints. Most of them are still the original paints that I had since I got them. Even though I use this one quite a bit, it's lasted a long time. That's the one thing about watercolor, you can really stretch it out. So if you're trying to be a bit more cost effective, I actually think watercolor can be, because you can really thin it out and you can do a lot with very minimal colors. Whereas like acrylics, when it dries permanent. Oils, they're expensive and it's not very good for like mobile use. Gouache, it can reactivate, but it's very expensive. But that one works usually better for me out of the tube. Not when it's dry. Mayu is asking, when do you decide like when an artwork is finished? Well, when it kind of completes the main intention of the job. Does it first accomplish all the necessary amount of information I want to go for? Uh, from there, one of the key things is just physically what you're doing. Am I just kind of nitpicking things, right? Usually that's when I kind of stop. But right now, my intentions are still very clear in terms of what I'm trying to do. Local colors, getting the sense of influence of light, a little bit more ink work on top, using colored pencil to be able to help kind of influence some of the cleanup and polish. So there's still many more steps ahead. And we're going to spend maybe about 10, 15 minutes on this. And we're going to wrap things up tonight. Layla's asking me about coming to Singapore for the Singapore Comic Con. It's funny you asked that because, Superani will be there this year. Obviously, Archer will be there, Stanley. And they all asked me, well, Stanley asked me, he's like, are you going to be at Singapore Comic Con? You should go. And I met the people that actually, operate that Comic Con. And Superani going this is because they also do workshops out there. Initially, they were asking if I would want to come, but the Singaporean Comic Con people didn't necessarily invite me, mainly because of how far I live. I'm in the US, so inviting artists and guests, and they would help get me out there and that sort of stuff. The cost is too high. So we're hoping next year for the Singapore Comic Con and the Singapore workshops under Superani. I would love to visit Singapore. I've heard great things about it. But for this particular year, not attending. But Superani will be there. In terms of who's going, I believe Hyunjin was going to go there, Dong Ho Kim. I'm not sure who else. It might be Rocky. This paper that I'm using is just regular watercolor paper made by Canson, I believe. Okay, we got the red on the gloves. We're gonna get the red on the boots. So you can see how that red is a bit greenish tint. So the green underneath it is still influencing it. So I went to the light, the tint of it, and now I'm going to the local colors. Treating it as washes, and so that the underpaint can influence the top paint. Next step is I'm going to go to the base costume, which I'll use more of like a darker bluish gray. And we're going to go that right now. So let me get the paper towel. It's going to wipe off this section of the palette. And I'm going to mix in here this sort of like indigo-ish blue. I'm looking for more of like an ultramarine. This is like a French ultramarine. And I'm going to use burnt umber, like a dark brown. I'm going to mix it together to get kind of a darker gray value. And the more of this burnt umber that I use, it becomes warmer of a dark black. The more ultramarine or blue influence I use, it becomes cooler of a dark. So this becomes a nice dark, and so I don't use always like black exactly. I'll use lamp black once in a while, but I'll mix to my darks like this. So add a little bit of water to it more, thin it out, dab it on the towel. I'm gonna go on top of this, thin it out more actually. So up above where the green sections are is kind of like a shadow. Because the light's coming from underneath, there are going to be sections in shadow above. So I'm using this to kind of strengthen the value structure. And because the costume is dark. So with the green underneath it, it'll influence that gray to retain that sort of green, luminosity. But I can influence the color of it with the darkness because the base local color of the leotard or the suit he's wearing is a very dark shade, which I'm going to bring into this as well. I was initially going to place like a secondary light, but I'm not going to do that. Let's see. Okay, I've never heard about Escape Studios courses in Any suggestions on that, please let us know. Um, Crab is asking, would I recommend all students use ballpoint or would you recommend the felt tip pen? Both, based on your interest. Why can't you use both also? Certain exercises might require more of the felt tip pen, but on top of that, you can also sketch with a ballpoint in certain opportunities when you have the time. So don't relegate and focus on trying to segregate or gatekeep, not even gatekeep, but more bar materials away from yourself because you think it's not right. Even digital. If you're interested in digital, sketch with that also. But you also have to understand the functions as to why we're limiting certain tools. So then it's about intention of choosing because it is something you're trying to acquire as a skill set. Not just because we're thinking of it as one material is better than the other. That's not the case. Felt tip pen is not better than ballpoint. It just has and it brings in a certain experience that you cannot get with ballpoint. And vice versa with ballpoint to felt tip. Inside the chains. Even inside like little cape areas, there could be like shadow shapes. I'm gonna bring in a bit more red in there. I might do it with the watercolor, but I may also do it with the color pencil because the color pencil can give me a nice sort of strong saturations. Whereas with the watercolor, the saturation of some of these will get dulled because again when they dry out, the amount of pigment that I have is not that much pigment compared to water base. So unless I use like paint out of the tube, I might be able to get much more thicker, sort of opaque and saturated colors. But I'm gonna just use a color pencil for that. Yeah, this is Bond. Was my Phantom Blade piece recorded? It was not. I did it purely just I was having fun. The Batman piece wasn't recorded either. I it's like I don't record every single thing that I do. Um, I don't force myself to. A lot of times I just draw because I want to draw. I'll post it later on. Because the thing with stuff like this, it's not the aim to go on YouTube like, oh, I gotta make content now. It's not the way I approach it. It's just that I am gonna do this, so I might as well share it. I might as well live stream it, and it happens to be recorded. Um, but there are times in which I'm not gonna go on YouTube because I just want to do it for myself. Let's go into the rock base here. So I'm gonna use that same sort of dark gray and hit the sort of sides that in shadow. Ooh, spilled some watercolor on there. Lift it away. And I'm not worried about these sort of splotches and stuff like that because I'll be able to clean it up later. And even if I don't, it's a nice little effect. Maybe I'll use that more, so little splatters and stuff like that. Even though I want to keep the background as white and pristine, it's fine. You gotta learn to compromise. You can't be so rigid. It's the only way really to like move forward is to adapt, you know? Adapt to the situation. It didn't go the way you wanted to initially. It's all right. Go with the flow. Yeah, the glint, Kev, was from the airbrush. I just use white paint, gouache, and I hit it with the airbrush. What I tend to use for airbrush at times, I have an actual compressor with an airbrush to the side, which I will use later. But sometimes if I'm, let's say, like on location somewhere, or if I'm just being a little bit lazy, I have something like this. This is made by a company called Spray Gunner, and this is called the No Name, spraygunner.com. And this thing is battery operated, so it's about 75% battery right now. And I can just airbrush with this. It's got its own little mini compressor. In terms of PSI, I think it's only hitting about maybe 20 PSI or less. But in terms of just doing some like passes and a little bit of airbrushing with paint, it's more than suffice. So if I want to hit it with things like a little bit of, sort of light illumination or whatever the case is, or darken some stuff for vignetting, it's really good for that. I've used it for things like live drawing. I do it for my commissions at Comic Cons. I'll bring it to my shows once in a while. I don't use it all the time, but when it's there and it's handy, I'll bring it out. Harry's asking, have I ever gotten a fountain pen repaired? Um, I've tried to once, but they couldn't figure it out. They didn't understand well, it's not really a repair. I just had someone look at it, basically. The pen is just, it's not functioning as well as I want it to be in terms of flow of the ink. So I would like to bring it in at some point because I spent a lot of money on it. Um, Finding reputable repairers, I don't have any that I know of right now. So I probably just ask around, friends and stuff like that, or people that work in the industry. Maybe they will know. But no, I've never actually sent it in for full repair. But there is one in which I would like to do something with. Feels pretty cool. Not sure how you guys feel about it, how you guys see it, but it was fun to create. Spawn coming out of the ground, glowing green. So I also have what's the part of the day? I have it over here. Let me get it. This one I just bought. The Infinity by Harder and Steenbeck. So I bought this one this year in May. German made airbrush. Has a bit of air in it still. I've used it and it's smooth as hell in terms of the trigger. I love the trigger on this thing. I've read some complaints about the nozzle and some of the O-rings. I haven't had major difficulties of it just yet, but I've only just started using it. It's a beautiful airbrush, and again, I love the trigger. It's super smooth. Um, it's quite costly, so from what I've been hearing about the reviews, I'm a little bit disappointed to hear about it because again, it's not a cheap airbrush, especially if it does come down to things like the O-rings and stuff like that, the sealers. So people have talked about like getting third-party rings and replacements and stuff like this. It's like, I don't want to deal with that. Just work. I have Iwata airbrush, and the same thing. It's like I haven't really found like an airbrush I would say that's just like that's dependable. There's always just something a little bit about them. Whether it's just like the flow or how the ink or the paint comes out, or I think I have to get maybe a bigger nozzle, like a point 0.5. I think this, I don't know what the size of this is, this thing. This might be like a point 0.2. Did I also start my journey from rotating boxes? I mean, kind of. My art journey started at the age of 5. So I didn't start drawing boxes then. I only started drawing boxes in my 20s. So from my toddler years of being a child to my teenage years, it was mostly copy, 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 copy. Looking at illustrations, comic artists, things that I liked, and imitating them over and over and over again. And I'll create my own things from it. Imagine characters, make up my own stuff, make up mini little comics. And then when I went to school and went to dynamic sketching, then we started drawing boxes and cubes. But even then, it was like, yeah, did a good amount of them. I didn't kill myself drawing a bunch of boxes. Um, and it, definitely is a necessary form to understand well. And even then, it's like, yeah, there's never enough of those you could draw. But I wouldn't necessarily say it's got like to be the most perfect thing. As long as you feel comfortable enough, you're fine. Move on. Just basically the idea is don't get stuck with anything, especially in foundation, you know. Just get good enough, move on. Don't chase perfection. There's no such thing as a perfect cube. Freehand drawing it. You could say, well, I could draw a perfect cube. Great, but can you draw it 10 times over perfectly every single time consistently? I doubt it, unless you're some machine or special person. I can't. It'll be off a little bit. There'll be something wrong with it, slightly. But as long as it's good enough, it's enough. I'm gonna go back up here real quickly and just kind of hit a little bit. Right up that part. I want to let the eyes glow greenish because he has green eyes later. I just want to hit the major parts. This is pretty much there. So there's not much more color, because that's Spawn. He's just red and black. And the light influence is there. Green light. I'm going to draw on top of this area a little bit more just to help define some of the shapes of the rocks. I don't want to hatch a bunch of stuff on top of it, but just kind of draw some shapes in to let it kind of transition a bit better this direction. That's all I want to do. I am going to use colored pencil still at the next stage. Um, do a little bit of influence of that, especially so I can kind of bring out some of the edges, highlights, maybe a little bit of influence of the dark side as well. Um, anyways, we're pretty much there. Is there anybody having last comments or questions? Please do ask any time as we can wrap things up here. But we are pretty much closing down. We're pretty good. So, question is, how's my illness? Am I healthier now? I am doing much better. I still wouldn't say I'm 100%, but I'm far better than when I was sick last year, and it has been about a little bit over a year now. And thankfully, I'm doing fairly well. Working out a lot, going to the gym much more. Body feels good, but as I'm becoming older, hopefully crossing fingers, things don't continue in terms of that trend, that sort of trend of illnesses and whatnot. But you never know. So I got to be a bit more mindful as I become in my middle age. I'm gonna have to get more tests and stuff like that, and not just from the illness that I got, but from other things, that I need to be screening for, right? As I become a middle-aged man, um, especially cancer stuff. It's like you never know. One of the benefits was, when I got sick last year and they didn't know what it was, we had to do so many scans because we couldn't identify it. So when I first checked in to the ER emergency, they put me under like 2 or 3 MRIs, and they put me through CT scans. CT scans at first, just check, found nothing. They went to the MRI. They do basic MRI, and then what they will do is they will put the uh, it's that fluid which helps illuminate the blood vessels on the inside. It's like I can't remember what it's called, but anyways, when it's in your body and you feel the sort of the radiation, I guess, from the MRI machine, it heats up your body. You can feel the heat of it when it goes to your system. It's such a weird feeling. Um, and so you can see every like little detail. So they shot MRI both my head, neck, and then my torso, um, just to see if there's anything there. And thankfully, by going through like this big screening of stuff, they didn't find anything else. So they checked my brain, uh, they checked, things like my spine, my chest area, anything for any signs of, major complications, blood clots, aneurysms, stroke signs, cancers, tumors, that sort of thing. And my biological father passed from a brain tumor when I was 10. So when I was younger, I experienced, my dad going through it, uh, getting sick, being diagnosed, and having a bunch of surgery, going through brain surgery and stuff like that. And I saw, the stages that where he went from being relatively healthy and just transitioning into, wilting into nothing. As he's going through also chemotherapy and all the radiation and stuff like that. It didn't last long. So he passed when I was like 10. So that memory, of course, is still very strong, which I never really discussed or talked about when I was younger. As I become older, you begin to, understand your history and know how to process it better. When you're youth, you just don't know what to do with it. But anyways, as I become older, I'm now older now than my father was. He passed, I think, when he was like 40 years old, something like that. And so I'm 44 now. So I'm older than him when he passed. So as I get to this age, it's like, I thought when I got sick last year, I thought that was it. I thought, oh, that's it. Here it is. There's my brain tumor. Because as a young kid, you kind of think, I mean, that's all I know. My dad died from that. So I'm probably going to get that, It must be some family thing. Um, but there was no way to know. I never tested anything else, and there was no signs of it. So when I got hit with this illness last year, and I was seeing double vision, and I went to the hospital, and they're doing all these scans on my brain and stuff like that. It's like, oh shoot, what are they gonna find? They're gonna find something in my brain. So literally, when I first saw the signs of it, June 6th, June 7th, when I saw the double vision, in my mind, I thought, again, it's like this is my time. This is over, So I literally thought it was like I was done in terms of like drawing, sketching, artwork, even possibly of like, whatever the future was. So I was already thinking of this like, man, how am I going to now live? Whatever time I have left over at this point. Um, and so when they did all the tests, that's where, it actually had a silver lining, which is they found nothing. Well, no, there is no cancers or things in the brain and no strokes and stuff like that. Um, so thankfully, that gives me a relief of thought in mind of like, oh, okay, I guess I'm not I don't have that just yet, and so I'll do the best I can in terms of safeguarding that. And I need to do other tests as well too, especially things like heart stuff. There's definitely family things within that, uncles and stuff like this passed from heart attacks and whatnot. Definitely things like you know, prostate cancer. Uncle has it. Um, Things like colon, that sort of thing. Got to check it. So I just recently I sent in, maybe this is TMI, too much information, but I did send in this sort of annual exam now I have to do at this age, which I just started now. They sent me this packet in the mail. I was like, what is this thing? I was like, oh, they want me to do a rectal colon exam test for cancers. So I just send in samples and stuff like that and test it in and see what they'll say. It's like, oh, shoot, what if they find something now? As you become older, you become a little bit more just like, fearful of what you'll find and what you're going to get. Um, I'm at that stage, I guess, in life, as all of us will get to that some point. So, especially when there is family history, right? I don't know. I'm not really that overtly thinking about it. Like, I don't have it in my mind every day. It's not to say it doesn't bother me, but at the same time, I think it's because I lived with it for so long that in my youth, I already kind of came to sort of like this understanding that that's probably the way I'm gonna go. It may sound very kind of like morbid for some people, but to be honest with you, to me, it's not. I very much came to comfort of mortality very early on due to my experiences and stuff like this. Um, Not to say that, that I'm running towards it, and not that it's a good thing for people to revel in, but I also understand, kind of the way it goes. So, anyways, yeah, for people asking about health stuff, it's like it's so odd for people to ask. It's because for most of my life I've never had any sort of health scare. So last year when I went through it, it was my very first real sort of like experience. It wasn't a natural thing. It was purely by chance where I just ate something bad and my immune system responded to it, over responded where I had the autoimmune response. But again, now people keep asking, it's like, are you okay, and is your health better, and that sort of stuff. And people always recommend, it's like, maybe it was all the stress and all that sort of stuff. It's like, yeah, maybe, but really, it was purely just just random chance that I got this thing because it's just something I ate, and anybody can get it at whatever age. You can be literally, you can be a 10-year-old kid or in your 60s. The thing that I got is not um, relegated to just old people or unhealthy people. It's anyone because it's immune system based. It's autoimmune, but still, at the same time, I do appreciate everyone's concern. Um, but no, I'm better. I'm better from last year. And mind the fact that these sort of things I share with you these days is something I'm much more comfortable with. And in my youth and my teens and 20s is very much a thing that I completely avoided. If anything, actually, what it was is I hid it, is the best way to put it, right? It's not that I avoided it, I hid it. I put it underneath, put it under the rug, never thought about it, never brought it up. And that's simply just the way I lived. And I think it's just as you mature, as you get older, your perceptions on things change, and the ability to share things, for not just because I have a platform, as some people would say. I think anybody should have will hopefully have the connections and the people around you in which you can also share and communicate and talk about things. And that's an unfortunate part when people can't. But I feel fortunate that I now can at the moment. Holding on to it definitely sucks because I'm very much a internal person. Think, 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 feel a lot but never share. Want to say things but never do. That was who I was younger as a kid. Constantly thought, always had thoughts of something. Always wanted to say but never said. Always wanted to do, never did. It was a life of hesitancy, a life of self doubt in my youth. But that's normal. As a young male, you know, I can't speak on women's behalf, as you guys will have your own trials and tribulations and difficulties going through life. How did I come up with amazing stories? Like, what kind of stories? If I'm talking about the stories I'm sharing now, that's just life stories, right? Everybody has them. My stories are not unique. They're not special. They're not better than yours. Everybody has them. All right, we're pretty much wrapped up here at this point. Again, there's more work to be done at this point. I'm not done with this piece. I have still about a good, in terms of percentage, I think I only keep this, I see this at maybe 70% done. So I still have a lot of work on this one to do. Uh, so starting probably tomorrow in the morning, I'm going to work on this a bit more, bringing in things like the color pencil stuff, as I said, a bit of marker work potentially, a little bit more ink drawing, sketching of the shapes and forms. But it's like a start. We have a good established beginning. And I'm glad you guys were able to kind of experience, maybe witness the kind of the process of creating images like this. Again, I'm aiming for finishes and polishes of stuff like here, like with this one as well too. So this would be the collection of pieces that we'll have for Comic Con like this. Oh, I will definitely post it. Once I'm done, I'll for sure 100% post it. In any case, I want to try to create as many of these as I can because New York Comic Con is not until end of October. So I have, this month to the early parts of September, end of September, early parts of October to keep making these. My aim is hopefully to shoot for about 10 to 15 pieces. That's idealistically what I would like to go for. So 10 to 15 different sort of characters, varying sort of images and stuff like that, which I will continue to share. Maybe in the future we'll do more streams like this as well too, which is more centric to this kind of thing. And I'll keep coming back. I don't have any LA events at the moment. Again, I'll be walking around Lightbox in October, but that's about it. And Mohammed, the improvisation, if I do something wrong, is based on pure experience. In the beginning, you're going to improvise and fail. First, fail a lot. Okay? As a commonality of sort of cliche feedback that most artists will give you, failure is the most important teacher, and that's very much true here. In terms of improvisation, it's learn through failing. Okay. On that note, we will finish up and close out. Thank you guys for hanging out. I will see you all next time. In terms of when we'll be live, again, I don't necessarily have a scheduled plan. Just follow my Instagram and social media, and I'll post on stories and I'll pop up once in a while saying, hey, we're going live in about 15, 20 minutes. Jump on when you can. And if you catch me, you catch me. If you don't, we'll see you next time. All right. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.